They said only a fool would marry a pauper. Tonight, in the most glittering ballroom London had ever seen, Lydia Whitmore was about to discover exactly how cruel high society could be. Her engagement, her future, her entire world was about to shatter in front of 200 witnesses who would savor every humiliating second. But what the aristocracy didn't know was that one man was watching, a man powerful enough to change everything, a man who saw not weakness in her downfall, but something far more dangerous: strength. If you want to see how a disgraced woman becomes the most powerful duchess in England, stay until the end. And tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The chandeliers of Ashford House blazed like 1,000 fallen stars, casting golden light across the most exclusive ballroom in London. Silk gowns swirled in kaleidoscope patterns as couples waltzed to the orchestra's elegant melody. Champagne flowed freely. Laughter tinkled like expensive crystal. The spring social season had reached its peak, and everyone who mattered had gathered to see and be seen. Lydia Whitmore stood at the edge of the ballroom, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her like shadows. She had dressed carefully tonight. Her gown was last season's design, pale blue silk with delicate embroidery, but still respectable. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant chignon, adorned with her mother's pearl pins. She wore no other jewelry. There was none left to wear. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since her father's investment consortium had collapsed, taking the Whitmore fortune with it. 3 weeks since their Mayfair townhouse had been sold to creditors. 3 weeks since Lydia and her mother had moved into a cramped set of rented rooms in an unfashionable quarter of the city. 3 weeks since her entire world had turned to ash. "They're staring again," murmured her friend Charlotte, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "I'm sorry, Lydia. I thought perhaps tonight would be different." Lydia accepted the glass with a tight smile. "Different? Why would it be different? I'm still penniless. There's still vultures circling a carcass." "Don't say that." "It's true." Lydia took a small sip, barely tasting the expensive wine. "Lady Pemberton cut me directly in the receiving line. Mrs. Ashford seated me at the furthest table from the family, and I'm quite certain I heard someone compare me to a beggar wearing borrowed finery." Charlotte's expression turned sympathetic. "You know how society is. Give them a few months and some other scandal will—" "I don't have a few months." Lydia's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Mother is ill, Charlotte. The doctor says it's the stress. We can barely afford medicine, let alone rent. If Adrian doesn't—" She stopped herself, glancing across the ballroom. There he stood. Lord Adrian Hallwell, her fiancé of 8 months. He was laughing with a group of young aristocrats near the terrace doors, looking utterly at ease in his perfectly tailored evening clothes. His golden hair caught the chandelier light. His handsome face showed no trace of concern. He hadn't visited Lydia once since the financial collapse. "He will honor the engagement," Charlotte insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "He proposed to you when your family had money. Surely he won't—" "Won't what? Abandon me now that I'm poor?" Lydia laughed bitterly. "You have more faith in masculine honor than I do." As if summoned by her words, Adrian finally looked across the ballroom. Their eyes met. For a moment, Lydia allowed herself to hope. They had been happy together, hadn't they? He had written her poetry. He had called her beautiful. He had promised her the world. Then Adrian looked away. The dismissal was so casual, so complete, that Lydia felt the air leave her lungs. "Lydia," Charlotte began, "I need some air." Lydia thrust her champagne glass into her friend's hands and moved toward the terrace doors, keeping her chin high despite the renewed whispers that followed her movement. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people who had once called her friend and now treated her like a beggar at their gates. The terrace was blessedly empty. Lydia gripped the stone balustrade and breathed in the cool night air, trying to steady herself. Below, the manicured gardens of Ashford House stretched into darkness. In the distance, London glittered like a jewel box that no longer had room for her. "Miss Whitmore!" Lydia spun around. Adrian stood in the terrace doorway, backlit by the ballroom's golden glow. For a moment, one foolish, hopeful moment, she thought he had come to comfort her. Then she saw his expression. "Adrian." She moved toward him, relief flooding through her. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. I know these past weeks have been difficult, but we need to talk. His voice was flat, formal, nothing like the warm tones he had used when courting her. Lydia's smile faltered. Of course. I wanted to speak with you as well, about the wedding plans. I know we had discussed a September ceremony, but given the circumstances, perhaps we should consider something smaller, more intimate. Mother and I have been looking at— There won't be a wedding. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lydia stared at him. What? Adrian stepped fully onto the terrace, and she saw that his face was set in hard lines. This wasn't the man who had kissed her hand in her father's garden. This was a stranger wearing his face. I'm ending our engagement. He spoke quickly, as if rushing through an unpleasant task. I wanted to tell you privately before making the announcement. Announcement? Lydia's mind reeled. Adrian, I don't understand. We're engaged. We've been planning our future together. You said you loved me. That was before. His jaw tightened. Before your father's recklessness destroyed your family's name. Before you became a liability. The cruelty of it struck her like a physical blow. A liability? What would you call it? Adrian's voice rose slightly. You have no dowry. No connections that matter anymore. Your family name is synonymous with financial scandal. Did you truly think I would shackle myself to that? That I would damage my own reputation by associating with— With what? Lydia's voice shook with barely controlled fury. Say it, Adrian. With me? He had the grace to look away. It's not personal, Lydia. It's simply the way the world works. I have a duty to my family, to my title. I need a wife who brings something to the marriage beyond sentiment. I see. Lydia's hands clenched at her sides. And the promises you made? The future we planned? I made those promises to the daughter of a wealthy merchant, not to a penniless woman living on charity. Each word was a dagger. Lydia felt something inside her crack, but she refused to let it shatter completely. Not yet. Not in front of him. Then I release you from your promises. Her voice emerged surprisingly steady. Clearly you value money more than honor. Adrian's face flushed with anger. Don't you dare question my honor. I'm being honest with you. More honest than you deserve considering your father's fraud. My father made poor investments. That's not fraud. The law may call it poor investments. Society calls it fraud. Adrian stepped closer, and Lydia caught the sharp scent of brandy on his breath. He had been drinking, heavily. You should be grateful I'm giving you this courtesy. I could have simply let you humiliate yourself further by clinging to expectations that will never be met. Grateful? The word came out as a whisper. You want me to be grateful? I want you to be realistic. Adrian's expression shifted to something almost pitying. Look at yourself, Lydia. You're wearing a gown from last season. You're living in rented rooms. You have nothing to offer a man of my standing. Did you truly think love would be enough? Before Lydia could respond, she heard voices behind them. She turned to see several guests had drifted onto the terrace, champagne glasses in hand. Among them were Mrs. Ashford and Lady Pemberton, the two most notorious gossips in London society. They had heard everything. Adrian saw them too, and something in his expression changed. The private cruelty transformed into public performance. Miss Whitmore, he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the terrace. I must formally dissolve our engagement. Only a fool would marry a pauper, and I am no fool. The words rang out like a gunshot. Conversation on the terrace died instantly. Through the open doors, Lydia saw heads turning in the ballroom. The orchestra played on, but the social machinery had ground to a halt. Everyone was watching. Mrs. Ashford's eyes gleamed with malicious delight. Lady Pemberton's mouth curved into a barely concealed smile. The other guests stared with expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The final complete destruction of Lydia Whitmore. Adrian seemed to realize he had an audience now, and he played to it. I regret that you allowed yourself false hopes, Miss Whitmore. But surely even you must understand that marriage requires more than mere affection. It requires suitable partners. Equals. He paused, letting the implication sink in. You and I are no longer equals. Lydia felt the humiliation wash over her in waves. This was worse than poverty, worse than social exile. This was complete public annihilation of everything she had been. Part of her wanted to collapse, to beg, to plead with Adrian to reconsider, to remember the promises he had made, to show mercy. But a different part, a stronger part she hadn't known existed, rose up like steel in her spine. She lifted her chin and met Adrian's eyes directly. "You're quite right, my lord." Her voice carried clearly across the silent terrace. "We are no longer equals." Adrian blinked, momentarily confused. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. Lydia continued, her words precise and cutting. "When I agreed to marry you, I believed you to be a man of honor, a man whose word meant something, a man who valued commitment over convenience." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held nothing but cold contempt. "I was mistaken. You are none of those things." Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. No one spoke to a lord this way, especially not a disgraced woman with no social standing. Adrian's face darkened. "How dare you?" "I dare because I have nothing left to lose." Lydia stepped closer to him, and he actually flinched. "You've taken everything else, Adrian, my reputation, my future. But you cannot take my dignity. That I give only to those worthy of it." She reached into her reticule and withdrew the engagement ring he had given her 8 months ago. It was a simple sapphire, surrounded by small diamonds. Once she had treasured it. Now she looked at it with only disgust. "I believe this belongs to you." She held it out. "Save it for the woman who can afford to marry a coward." Adrian snatched the ring from her hand, his face mottled with rage and embarrassment. Around them, the watching aristocrats stared in stunned silence. Lydia turned to address them all. "I apologize for the scene, ladies and gentlemen. I assure you it won't happen again. I have no intention of remaining where I'm not wanted." With that, she walked past Adrian, past the gawking guests, and back into the ballroom. Every eye followed her progress. The orchestra had stopped playing. Conversations died as she passed. She could feel their judgment, their scorn, their satisfaction at witnessing her complete ruin. She kept her head high and her steps steady. Charlotte materialized at her side, gripping her arm. "Lydia, what happened? Everyone's saying, I need to leave." Lydia's voice trembled despite her best efforts. "Now, please." "Of course, I'll call for my carriage." "No." Lydia couldn't bear the thought of waiting, of standing in the entrance hall while whispers swirled around her. "I'll walk. It's not far to my rooms." "Walk? Alone? At night? Lydia, that's not safe." "Nothing about my life is safe anymore." Lydia pulled away from her friend's grip, moving toward the ballroom's main entrance. "Thank you, Charlotte, for being kind when others weren't. But I need to be alone now." She didn't wait for a response. She collected her shawl from a footman who stared at her with obvious pity, then stepped out into the London night. The cool air hit her like a slap. Behind her, Ashford House blazed with light and music and laughter. The party would continue. They would discuss her for an hour, perhaps 2, then move on to other entertainment. By tomorrow, she would be yesterday's scandal. Lydia walked quickly down the marble steps and onto the pavement. Her thin slippers were inadequate for the cobblestones, but she barely noticed the discomfort. She needed distance. She needed darkness where no one could see her finally break. She had made it perhaps 2 blocks when the tears came. They fell silently at first, tracking down her cheeks as she hurried through the gas-lit streets. Then came the sobs, wrenching gasps that tore from her chest. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sounds, but they escaped anyway. Only a fool would marry a pauper. The words echoed in her mind, cruel and final. Adrian had said them so casually, as if discarding her was no different than returning ill-fitting gloves to a shop. 8 months. 8 months of believing she had found love, partnership, a future. 8 months of planning a wedding, imagining children, dreaming of a life together. All of it meant nothing the moment her money disappeared. Lydia stumbled to a stop in a shadowed alcove between 2 townhouses. She leaned against the cold brick wall and let herself finally, completely fall apart. The sobs came harder now, ugly and desperate. Her carefully arranged hair tumbled loose. Her mother's pearl pins clattered to the pavement. She didn't care. Everything she had been, wealthy merchant's daughter, respected member of society, cherished fiancée, All of it was gone, stripped away in 3 weeks of catastrophic loss. What was left? Who was she without the titles and money and social position that had defined her entire life? A pauper, a beggar, a fool who had believed in love. Miss Whitmore! Lydia's head snapped up. A man stood at the entrance to the alcove, his tall form silhouetted against the gas lamp's glow. For a terrifying moment, she thought Adrian had followed her, that he intended to heap more cruelty upon her broken pride. Then the man stepped forward, and she saw his face. Duke Nathaniel Ravenscroft. Lydia's breath caught. She had never spoken to the Duke, though she had seen him at various social functions. He was impossible to miss, tall and imposing, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes the color of winter storms. He was perhaps 15 years her senior, a man known for his vast wealth, his political influence, and his complete disinterest in society gossip. He also had a reputation for being coldly calculating. They called him the Winter Duke behind his back, a man whose emotions were as frozen as his northern estates. What was he doing here? "Your Grace!" Lydia straightened hastily, scrubbing at her tear-stained face with trembling hands. "I apologize. I didn't mean to. That is, I was just—" She couldn't finish the sentence. How did one explain being found sobbing in an alcove like a common vagrant? The Duke studied her with those unsettling gray eyes. "I saw what happened at Ashford House." Lydia's humiliation doubled. "Then you know I'm a public spectacle. I'll leave. I shouldn't have stopped here. This is probably your property, and It's not my property, and you have every right to grieve what was stolen from you." The words, spoken with unexpected gentleness, nearly undid her again. Lydia blinked rapidly, fighting fresh tears. "Stolen is too strong a word. I simply lost everything." "No." The Duke's voice hardened. "What happened to you tonight was theft. Lord Halwell stole your dignity, your reputation, and your future. He did it deliberately, publicly, and cruelly. That is theft." Lydia stared at him. "Why would you say that? You don't know me." "I know enough." The Duke moved closer, and she caught the scent of sandalwood and something darker, like smoke from a winter fire. "I know you conducted yourself with remarkable grace under impossible circumstances. I know you refused to beg or grovel, even when doing so might have saved you from humiliation. And I know—" He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I know that you are far stronger than anyone in that ballroom realized." The unexpected praise left Lydia speechless. She had spent 3 weeks being pitied, scorned, or ignored. No one had called her strong. "You're kind to say so, Your Grace, but strength doesn't pay rent or buy medicine for my mother." The practicality of her situation crashed back over her. "I should go. It's late, and I have a long walk ahead." "Where are your rooms?" Lydia hesitated. Something about this encounter felt surreal, like a strange dream born from champagne and despair. "Bell Street, near Cheapside." The Duke's expression darkened. "That's nearly 2 miles, through neighborhoods that aren't safe for an unaccompanied woman at night." "I have no choice. I couldn't wait for a carriage, and I can't afford a hack." The admission of poverty still stung, even after everything. "Then I'll escort you." "What? No." Lydia shook her head quickly. "That's not necessary. You shouldn't—" "I insist." There was steel in his voice now, the tone of a man accustomed to having his commands obeyed. "You've endured enough tonight without adding assault or robbery to your troubles." Lydia wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. "Very well. Thank you." They walked in silence for several blocks, the Duke keeping a respectful distance. He had offered his arm, but Lydia had declined. She couldn't bear to be touched right now, even in courtesy. The streets grew narrower and darker as they moved away from the fashionable quarters. The gas lamps appeared less frequently. Shadows deepened. In the distance, Lydia could hear the rougher sounds of London, drunken shouts, breaking glass, a woman's shrill laughter. This was her world now. Not ballrooms and champagne, but darkness and survival. "May I ask you something?" The Duke's voice broke the silence. Lydia nodded warily. "What will you do now?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of her entire uncertain future. "I don't know," she admitted. "Find work, perhaps." If anyone will hire a disgraced merchant's daughter, or perhaps I'll become a governess, though I have no references." She laughed bitterly. "My mother and I discussed selling her jewelry, but there's so little left. Most of it went to creditors." "And Lord Hallwell? Will you try to win him back?" "Never." The word came out fierce and immediate. "I would rather starve than beg that man for mercy." "Good." The Duke's voice held approval. "He never deserved you." They turned onto Bell Street, a cramped row of aging townhouses that had seen better decades. Lydia stopped in front of the shabbiest one, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. "This is where I live now." She couldn't keep the shame from her voice. "Rather different from Mayfair." The Duke studied the building without visible judgment. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Lydia's head snapped toward him. "Why would you want to do that?" "I have a proposal for you." "A proposal?" Suspicion crept into her voice. She had heard about powerful men who made proposals to desperate women. "What kind of proposal?" The Duke met her eyes directly. "An honorable one, Miss Whitmore. I give you my word." There was something in his gaze, an intensity, a certainty that made Lydia believe him. Against all logic and caution, she believed him. 10 o'clock, she heard herself say. "My mother will be here, of course." "Of course." The Duke inclined his head in a slight bow. "Until tomorrow, Miss Whitmore." He turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving Lydia staring after him in confusion and unwilling hope. What kind of proposal could the Winter Duke possibly have for a penniless, ruined woman? She climbed the narrow stairs to her rented rooms, her mind spinning. Inside, her mother sat by the meager fire, wrapped in shawls despite the spring warmth. "Lydia? Is that you?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice was thin and tired. "I didn't expect you home so early. How was the ball?" Lydia removed her shawl and sat beside her mother, taking her frail hands. "Mama, something happened tonight." She told her everything. Adrian's cruelty, the public humiliation, the encounter with the Duke. Her mother listened in growing horror, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "Oh, my darling girl," Mrs. Whitmore whispered. "I'm so sorry. This is all our fault. If your father hadn't, Papa made mistakes. He didn't mean to hurt us." Lydia squeezed her mother's hands gently. "And Adrian showed his true character tonight. Better I discovered it now than after the wedding." "But what will we do?" Her mother's voice cracked with fear. "Lydia, we have perhaps a month before our savings run out. After that, we'll find a way." Lydia tried to sound more confident than she felt. "The Duke is calling tomorrow. He mentioned a proposal." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes widened. "A proposal? Lydia, you don't think he means—" "I don't know what he means." "But he gave his word it was honorable." Lydia helped her mother stand, guiding her toward the bedroom. "Try to rest, Mama. Tomorrow may bring answers." But after her mother had fallen into exhausted sleep, Lydia sat alone by the dying fire and wondered what kind of answers a man like Duke Ravenscroft could possibly offer. Outside, London slept. Somewhere in a grand townhouse, Adrian probably slept too, content in his cruelty. Somewhere else, society matrons were already composing the letters that would spread news of Lydia's humiliation across every drawing room in England. And somewhere in the darkness, the Winter Duke walked home with a plan forming in his calculating mind. A plan that would change 2 lives forever. Lydia watched the embers fade to ash and waited for morning. The clock struck 10, and Lydia's hands trembled as she straightened the threadbare cushions on the sofa for the 3rd time. Their rented rooms looked even shabbier in the morning light, faded wallpaper, a single cracked mirror, furniture that had been worn smooth by decades of previous tenants. She had tried to make the space presentable, but there was no hiding the reality of their circumstances. Her mother sat in the only decent chair, wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth of the morning. Mrs. Whitmore's face was pale and drawn, dark circles beneath her eyes testament to a sleepless night. "Are you certain about this, Lydia?" her mother asked for the 5th time. "A duke calling on us in these rooms? What could he possibly want?" Before Lydia could answer, a sharp knock echoed through the small space. She pressed her hand to her stomach, trying to calm the nervous flutter, then moved to open the door. Duke Nathaniel Ravenscroft stood in the narrow hallway, looking utterly out of place. He was dressed impeccably in a dark coat and crisp white cravat, his presence seeming to fill the cramped space. Behind him, Lydia could see their landlady, Mrs. Pettigrew, peering up the stairs with undisguised curiosity. "Your Grace," Lydia curtsied, acutely aware of her simple morning dress, the only one without visible mending. "Please, come in." The Duke entered, removing his hat. His gaze swept the room once, taking in everything, but his expression remained neutral. If he was appalled by their poverty, he gave no sign. "Mrs. Whitmore," he bowed to Lydia's mother with the same courtesy he would have shown to a duchess. "Thank you for receiving me." Mrs. Whitmore rose shakily to her feet. "Your Grace, this is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion." The Duke waited until both women were seated before taking his own seat on a rickety chair that creaked ominously under his weight. "But the matter I wish to discuss is time-sensitive." Lydia folded her hands in her lap, trying to appear composed. "You mentioned a proposal, Your Grace." "I did." The Duke's gray eyes fixed on hers with unsettling intensity. "And I meant exactly that. A proposal of marriage." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mrs. Whitmore gasped audibly. Lydia felt the room tilt slightly. "I'm sorry," she managed. "Did you just say—" "Marriage. Yes." The Duke's voice remained calm and businesslike, as if he were discussing a property transaction rather than matrimony. "Before you respond, please allow me to explain." Lydia's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Men like Duke Ravenscroft didn't propose to disgraced, penniless women they barely knew. "I think you'd better explain very thoroughly, Your Grace." A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "Fair enough. Miss Whitmore, I need a wife. Not for the reasons most men seek marriage. I have no interest in romance or sentiment. What I need is a partner. Someone capable of managing my estates, handling my social obligations, and representing the Ravenscroft name with intelligence and dignity." "And you think I'm that person?" Lydia couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "Your Grace, I have no dowry, no connections, and as of last night my reputation is in tatters. How could I possibly be suitable?" "Because you have something far more valuable than money or connections." The Duke leaned forward slightly. "You have competence. Last night, under the worst circumstances imaginable, you maintained your composure and dignity. You didn't beg or grovel. You faced public humiliation with your spine straight and your head high. That tells me you possess strength of character, something I value far more than bloodlines or bank accounts." Mrs. Whitmore found her voice. "Your Grace, this is all very flattering, but surely you must see how irregular this is. You don't know my daughter. You've never even spoken to her before last night." "That's true." The Duke acknowledged this with a nod. "Which is why I'm being completely transparent about my motivations. I don't love your daughter, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm not pretending this is a romantic attachment. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more." The bluntness should have been insulting, but somehow Lydia found it refreshing after Adrian's false poetry and empty promises. "What exactly would this business arrangement entail?" she asked carefully. "I would provide you and your mother with security, a home at Ravenscroft Estate in Yorkshire, financial stability, social protection. In return, you would serve as my duchess, managing the household, overseeing the staff, handling correspondence and social obligations. My estates are vast and currently mismanaged. I need someone intelligent enough to learn the systems and strong enough to implement necessary changes." "You want me to work for you?" Lydia said slowly. "As your wife, but in name only." "Precisely." The Duke's expression remained neutral. "I won't lie to you, Miss Whitmore. My reasons for seeking this arrangement are entirely practical. I have responsibilities that require a duchess, but I have no desire for the complications of a love match. You need security and protection. We can provide those things for each other without the messiness of false sentiment." Lydia's mind raced through the implications. This was insane, utterly insane. She had known this man for less than 12 hours, and he was proposing a practical marriage built on mutual need rather than affection. And yet, what other options did she have? Her mother was ill. Their money was running out. No one in society would associate with her now, let alone offer employment. Within months, they would be destitute. "Why me?" she asked. "Surely there are other capable women. Women with better reputations and more experience managing estates." "There are," the Duke agreed, "but they come with expectations. Families who would seek to influence my business decisions. Social circles that would expect me to play political games I have no interest in playing. You, Miss Whitmore, have no such entanglements. You need what I offer badly enough that you won't make demands I can't meet. And I witnessed firsthand that you have the spine to stand up even when the world is against you. That's the quality I need in a duchess." It was the most coldly rational proposal Lydia had ever heard. No flowers, no poetry, no pretense of romance, just brutal honesty about mutual advantage. Mrs. Whitmore spoke up, her voice trembling. "And if Lydia agrees to this arrangement, what guarantees would she have? How do we know you won't simply discard her when she's no longer useful, the way Lord Halwell did?" The Duke's expression hardened. "I am not Lord Halwell. When I make a commitment, I honor it. If Miss Whitmore becomes my duchess, she will remain my duchess for life. I will never publicly humiliate her, never cast her aside, never treat her as anything less than my equal partner in managing my affairs. You have my word on that." "The word of a duke?" Mrs. Whitmore said skeptically. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but we've learned that aristocratic promises mean very little." "Then let me be more concrete." The Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "I had my solicitor draw this up last night. It's a marriage contract that legally guarantees your daughter's security. If I should die, she receives control of the Yorkshire estate and a generous annual income for life. If I should ever seek to end the marriage, she retains the title of Duchess and receives the London townhouse plus £50,000. These terms are legally binding and cannot be altered without her consent." He placed the document on the small table between them. Lydia stared at it, her heart pounding. This was real. He had actually spent the night planning this, consulting lawyers, preparing legal protections for a woman he barely knew. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you give me so much power? Why would you bind yourself to these terms?" "Because I need you to trust me." The Duke's voice softened slightly. "And I understand that trust must be earned, especially after what you've experienced. These terms ensure that even if I prove unworthy of that trust, you will never again be left penniless and powerless. You will always have options, Miss Whitmore. That's more than Lord Halwell ever gave you." Lydia picked up the document with shaking hands, scanning the formal legal language. Everything he had promised was there, written in precise terms that left no room for interpretation. If she agreed to this marriage, she would never be helpless again. But at what cost? "You're asking me to give up any chance of love," she said quietly, "to accept a marriage that's nothing more than a business transaction. I'm asking you to be realistic." The Duke met her gaze steadily. "After last night, what are your prospects for a love match? Society has already condemned you. No respectable man will court you now. You could wait, hoping for some romantic miracle, while you and your mother slowly starve. Or you could accept my offer and build a life of purpose and security, even if it lacks sentiment." The words stung because they were true. Lydia had already mourned her romantic future during the long, dark hours of the previous night. She had no illusions left about love or happy endings. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "I leave for Yorkshire in 3 days." The Duke stood, retrieving his hat. "I would prefer to take my new Duchess with me, but I won't force your hand. Think about it, Miss Whitmore. Discuss it with your mother. If you decide to accept, send word to my London residence before Thursday morning." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. "One more thing. If you agree to this marriage, I will expect you to take your role seriously. This isn't charity. I genuinely need a capable partner to help manage my estates and affairs. The work will be demanding, and I will hold you to high standards. But in return, I promise you will always be treated with respect and dignity. No one, not Lord Halwell, not society matrons, not anyone, will ever humiliate you again without answering to me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent a strange warmth through Lydia's chest. This cold, calculating man was offering her not just security, but also protection. A shield against the world that had so recently destroyed her. "Thank you for your offer, Your Grace," she managed. "I will give it serious consideration." The Duke bowed to both women and departed, leaving behind the marriage contract and 1,000 unanswered questions. The moment the door closed, Mrs. Whitmore turned to her daughter. "Lydia, you cannot seriously be considering this madness." "Can't I?" Lydia sank back onto the sofa, her legs suddenly weak. "Mama, what choice do I have? We have perhaps a month before we're on the streets. I have no prospects, no opportunities, no future except poverty and ruin." "But to marry a stranger, a man who admits he doesn't love you and never will," her mother's voice cracked with distress. "Darling, you deserve better than a cold business arrangement." "I deserve better than public humiliation too, but here we are." Lydia picked up the marriage contract, reading through it more carefully. "At least the Duke is honest about his intentions. He's not pretending to love me, not making false promises. There's something almost honorable about that." "Honorable?" Mrs. Whitmore shook her head. "It's calculating. He's using your desperate circumstances to acquire a wife on his terms. And I would be using his wealth and position to escape those desperate circumstances." Lydia set down the contract and looked at her mother. "Is that so different from what every marriage in our society is? At least this one is honest about the transaction." Mrs. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft and sad. "I wanted love for you, Lydia. Real love. The kind your father and I shared before everything fell apart." "I wanted that too," Lydia admitted. "But I wanted it with Adrian, and we both saw how that ended. Maybe romantic love is a luxury I can no longer afford." The words tasted bitter, but she forced herself to be practical. The Duke was right. After last night's scandal, no decent man would court her. She could cling to dreams of romance while she and her mother slowly descended into poverty, or she could accept the cold reality of her situation and make the best choice available. Over the next 2 days, Lydia found herself returning again and again to the marriage contract. She read every clause, every provision, trying to find the trap she was certain must be hidden somewhere in the legal language. But there was no trap. The Duke had given her exactly what he promised: security, protection, and power. If anything, the contract was weighted heavily in her favor. On the second day, Charlotte came to visit, bringing news from society's rumor mill. "It's worse than I feared," Charlotte reported, settling onto the worn sofa. "Lady Pemberton is telling everyone that you threw yourself at Adrian and he had no choice but to publicly reject you. Mrs. Ashford claims your family's financial ruin was due to criminal activity, and Lord Holwell himself is playing the victim, saying he barely escaped a gold digger's trap." Lydia listened to the litany of lies with growing numbness. "Does anyone defend me?" Charlotte's expression turned apologetic. "A few people try, but they're quickly silenced. The scandal is too delicious for society to let facts interfere." She reached over and squeezed Lydia's hand. "I'm so sorry. I've tried to correct the worst of the rumors, but my voice doesn't carry much weight." "It's not your fault." Lydia squeezed back, grateful for this one loyal friend. "You've been kinder to me than I deserve." "Nonsense. You deserve far better than any of this." Charlotte hesitated, then added, "Though there is one curious rumor that might interest you." "Oh?" "People are saying Duke Ravenscroft was seen entering your building 2 days ago. Some are speculating that he's taken an interest in you." Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks. What kind of interest are they speculating about? "The scandalous kind, I'm afraid." Charlotte looked embarrassed. "You know how society is. They can't imagine a duke calling on a ruined woman for any respectable reason." Of course they couldn't. Lydia felt a flash of anger. Even the Duke's honorable proposal would be twisted into something sordid by the gossips, unless she made it impossible for them to dismiss. "Charlotte," she said slowly, an idea forming, "what if the rumors were right? What if the Duke has taken an interest in me?" Her friend's eyes widened. "Lydia, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Duke Ravenscroft has proposed marriage, and I'm considering accepting." Charlotte's mouth fell open. "Marriage? To the Winter Duke? Lydia, that's impossible. He never showed any interest in you before. Why would he suddenly—" She stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The contract. This is about the contract, isn't it? He needs a duchess, and you need security." "Is that so shocking?" Lydia asked. Every marriage in our circles is a transaction of some kind. At least this one is honest about the terms. But Lydia, a marriage without love. Love? Lydia laughed bitterly. I thought I had love with Adrian. Look where that got me. Maybe what I need now isn't romance. Maybe what I need is a partnership built on mutual respect and clear expectations. Charlotte studied her friend's face for a long moment. You've already decided, haven't you? Lydia looked down at her hands, at the pale mark on her finger where Adrian's ring had once sat. I think I have. The Duke offers me a future, Charlotte. Not a perfect one, perhaps, but a future where I'm not powerless, where I can protect my mother and rebuild some kind of life. How can I refuse that? Then I suppose I should wish you happiness, Charlotte said softly, though I fear you're trading one form of captivity for another. Perhaps, but at least this cage comes with dignity. That evening, Lydia sat down with her mother and told her the decision. Mrs. Whitmore wept, but she didn't argue. She too had counted their remaining coins and understood the mathematics of survival. The next morning, Lydia sent a note to the Duke's London residence. 3 words only. I accept, L.W. The response came within the hour. The Duke would call for them the following day at noon. The marriage would take place immediately by special license, and they would depart for Yorkshire that same evening. There would be no engagement party, no elaborate wedding breakfast, no months of planning and preparation. Just a simple ceremony and a journey north to her new life. Lydia spent the final day in London packing their few belongings. There was pitifully little to take. Some clothes, her mother's remaining jewelry, a few books. Everything else had been sold or left behind when they abandoned their Mayfair townhouse. Charlotte came to say goodbye, bringing a small package wrapped in brown paper. A wedding gift, she explained, pressing it into Lydia's hands. Open it later, when you're alone. Inside, Lydia would later discover, was a beautiful journal with blank pages and a note. For recording your new story, may it have a better ending than the last one. The Duke arrived precisely at noon, accompanied by his solicitor and a nervous-looking vicar. The ceremony took place in their shabby sitting room, with Mrs. Whitmore and Charlotte as witnesses. Lydia wore her mother's wedding dress, hastily altered to fit. It was old-fashioned and simple, but it was white and relatively clean. She had no flowers, no music, no tearful father to give her away. The vicar spoke the traditional words, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar intimacy of such a private ceremony. The Duke's responses were clear and firm. Lydia's voice shook only slightly when she spoke her vows. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke didn't kiss her. He simply took her hand and gave it a formal squeeze as if sealing a business deal, which Lydia supposed was exactly what this was. Your Grace, the solicitor said, handing the Duke a sheaf of papers. The marriage is legally registered. These copies are for you and the Duchess. The Duchess. The title sounded foreign and impossible. Yesterday she had been Lydia Whitmore, disgraced merchant's daughter. Today she was the Duchess of Ravenscroft, one of the most powerful women in England. If only it felt real. The Duke's carriage was far grander than anything Lydia had ever ridden in. Plush velvet seats, gleaming brass fixtures, and a coat of arms painted on the door that marked them as nobility. Mrs. Whitmore settled in with visible relief, already looking healthier just from the knowledge that their financial nightmare was over. As the carriage pulled away from Bell Street, Lydia looked back at the shabby building that had been her home for 3 terrible weeks. Part of her wanted to feel relief, gratitude for her escape. Instead, she felt only a strange numbness. The Duke sat across from her, reading through correspondence as if this were an ordinary journey rather than his wedding day. He had removed his coat, revealing a simple waistcoat and shirt sleeves that somehow made him seem more human and less like a marble statue. After an hour of silence, Mrs. Whitmore dozed off, her head nodding against the cushioned seat. The Duke glanced up from his papers and caught Lydia watching him. You're very quiet, Your Grace, he said, using her new title for the first time. Lydia almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I'm not certain what to say. This morning I was a penniless spinster. Now I'm a duchess. It's rather a lot to process. I imagine it is. The Duke set aside his papers. If you have questions, now would be a good time to ask them. We have a long journey ahead. Lydia had 1,000 questions, but one rose above the others. What exactly will you expect from me? You mentioned managing the estate, but what does that actually entail? Ravenscroft Estate is large, nearly 10,000 acres with several tenant farms, a village, and extensive household staff. The previous Duchess, my mother, managed all domestic affairs, tenant relations, and household finances. Since her death 5 years ago, I've struggled to maintain order. The staff have grown lazy, the tenants are dissatisfied, and the accounts are a disaster. And you want me to fix all of that? Lydia felt a flutter of panic. Your Grace, I have no experience managing anything so complex. But you're intelligent and capable of learning. The Duke's gray eyes held steady. I saw that much in how you handled yourself at Ashford House. You didn't collapse under pressure. You adapted. That's what I need, someone who can assess situations, make decisions, and implement solutions. I'll teach you the specifics of estate management. You'll provide the competence to execute. It was daunting, but also oddly exhilarating. For 3 weeks, Lydia had felt utterly powerless, at the mercy of circumstances beyond her control. Now this man was offering her responsibility, authority, meaningful work. What about society? She asked. Won't people talk about our sudden marriage? Let them talk. The Duke's voice was dismissive. We'll be in Yorkshire, far from London's gossip. By the time we return, the scandal will have faded. Besides, as Duchess, you outrank most of the people who mocked you. They'll be forced to show respect, whether they feel it or not. Lydia hadn't considered that. As Duchess of Ravenscroft, she now held a social position far above Lord Halwell, Lady Pemberton, even the Ashfords who had hosted that disastrous ball. The irony was almost sweet. One more question, she said quietly. You mentioned this is a business arrangement. Does that mean, that is, will you expect... She couldn't finish the sentence, heat flooding her face. Understanding flickered in the Duke's eyes. You're asking if I'll expect marital relations. Lydia nodded, mortified but needing to know. No. His answer was firm and immediate. I meant what I said. This is a partnership, not a love match. Your person is your own, Your Grace. I will never demand intimacy you're not willing to give. The relief was profound. Thank you for being direct. I promised you honesty. That includes being honest about expectations. The Duke picked up his papers again, signaling the conversation was over. The journey to Yorkshire took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a respectable coaching inn. The Duke secured separate rooms, one for Lydia and her mother, one for himself. Another small gesture that demonstrated his commitment to their arrangement. As they traveled north, the landscape changed. The crowded streets and sooty air of London gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The sky seemed bigger somehow, less crowded with buildings and smoke. Lydia found herself pressing close to the carriage window, drinking in the unfamiliar beauty. She had never been outside London before. Her entire world had been contained within the city's boundaries. Mayfair ballrooms, Hyde Park promenades, fashionable shops on Bond Street. This wild, open country felt like a different world entirely. On the afternoon of the second day, the carriage turned onto a private drive lined with ancient oak trees. The drive stretched for nearly a mile before the house came into view. Ravenscroft Estate. Lydia's breath caught. It wasn't a house. It was a palace. Gray stone walls rose 3 stories high with countless windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Wings stretched to either side of the main structure, and formal gardens spread out in geometric patterns that must have taken an army of gardeners to maintain. Welcome home, Your Grace, the Duke said, watching her reaction. Home. The word felt impossible. How could a place like this ever be home to a girl who had spent the last month living in 2 rented rooms? The carriage stopped before the main entrance, and immediately a flood of servants appeared. A stern-faced woman who must be the housekeeper. A white-haired butler with impeccable posture. Footmen in livery. Maids in crisp uniforms. At least 30 people lined up to greet their new mistress. Lydia's stomach twisted with anxiety. These people were her responsibility now. They would look to her for leadership, for direction, for decisions that affected their livelihoods. The Duke stepped out first, then turned to assist Lydia and her mother. As Lydia's feet touched the gravel drive, every servant bowed or curtsied in perfect synchronization. Staff, the Duke announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "May I present the Duchess of Ravenscroft, my wife. You will show her the same respect and obedience you show me. Her word is law in this household." The servants murmured acknowledgement, but Lydia caught the skeptical glances, the barely concealed curiosity. They were wondering who this unknown woman was, this sudden duchess who had appeared without warning or proper courtship. The housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, stepped forward. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to assess and judge in a single glance. "Your Grace," she said to Lydia, her tone perfectly polite and utterly cold. "Welcome to Ravenscroft Estate. I've prepared the Duchess's chambers for you and your mother. If you'll follow me?" It wasn't quite a dismissal, but it carried the weight of long-established authority. This woman had been running this household for years, and she clearly didn't appreciate an outsider arriving to disrupt her domain. The Duke caught Lydia's eye and gave her a small nod. "This," his expression seemed to say, "is your first test." Lydia straightened her spine and met Mrs. Blackwood's gaze directly. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. I look forward to learning about the household management from you. But first, I'd like to meet all the senior staff. Please arrange a meeting in 1 hour in the... Where would be appropriate?" Mrs. Blackwood's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the immediate assertion of authority. "The morning room, Your Grace. I'll have tea prepared." "Excellent." Lydia turned to the assembled servants. "I know my arrival is unexpected. I hope we'll work well together as I learn my new responsibilities." She kept her voice warm but firm, trying to strike a balance between approachability and command. The servants seemed uncertain how to respond. This wasn't the meek, grateful, poor relation they had probably expected. The Duke stepped beside her, his presence a silent endorsement of her authority. Together they entered Ravenscroft Estate. The interior was even more magnificent than the exterior. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, paintings in gilded frames that must be worth more than Lydia's entire former life. But there were also signs of neglect, dust in the corners, tarnished silver, flowers in the vases that were 2 days past fresh. Mrs. Blackwood led them up a grand staircase to the second floor, then down a corridor lined with family portraits. She stopped before an ornate double door. "The Duchess's chambers, Your Grace." She opened the doors to reveal a suite of rooms that took Lydia's breath away. A sitting room decorated in soft blues and creams. A bedroom with a canopied bed large enough for 4 people. A dressing room with wardrobes and mirrors. A private bathroom with an actual porcelain tub. It was larger and more luxurious than the entire Mayfair townhouse Lydia had grown up in. "The Duke's chambers are through that door," Mrs. Blackwood indicated a connecting door. "Though His Grace has not used them since his mother's passing, he prefers his study on the 3rd floor. A clear message. The Duke truly meant to keep their arrangement professional and separate. Mrs. Whitmore was shown to an adjoining guest room nearly as grand as Lydia's own chambers. After the housekeeper departed, mother and daughter stood together in the opulent sitting room, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of their fortunes. "Lydia," her mother whispered, "this is madness. Beautiful madness, but madness nonetheless." "I know." Lydia sank onto a velvet sofa that probably cost more than a year's rent in their Bell Street rooms. "But it's our madness now, Mama. We have to make the best of it." Exactly 1 hour later, Lydia entered the morning room to find the senior staff assembled. Mrs. Blackwood presided over the tea service with the authority of a queen. Beside her sat Mr. Hendricks, the butler, whose expression suggested he had served the Ravenscroft family since the house was built. The head gardener, the estate steward, the head groom, and several others formed a semicircle of skeptical faces. They were testing her. Lydia could see it in their expressions, in the way they watched her every move. This unknown woman who had married their Duke overnight, was she qualified to lead them? Or would she be one more incompetent mistress who made their lives difficult? Lydia took her seat and accepted a cup of tea from Mrs. Blackwood. She took a delicate sip, buying herself a moment to gather her thoughts, then set down the cup and met their eyes directly. "I know you have questions about who I am and why the Duke married me so suddenly. The truth is simple. His Grace needed a duchess capable of managing this estate, and I needed security for myself and my mother. We've entered into a practical partnership built on mutual benefit rather than romantic sentiment." The honesty clearly surprised them. Several servants exchanged glances. Lydia continued, I won't pretend to have experience managing an estate this size. I don't. What I do have is intelligence, determination, and a willingness to learn. Over the coming weeks, I'll be asking many questions as I familiarize myself with how Ravenscroft operates. I hope you'll be patient with my ignorance and honest in your answers. Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but what exactly do you intend to change? It was a fair question, and Lydia appreciated the directness. I can't answer that yet because I don't know what needs changing, but I will tell you this. I noticed dust in the main hall, tarnished silver in the dining room, and wilting flowers in several vases. Those are small things, but they suggest larger issues with household management. Mrs. Blackwood's face flushed. Your Grace, we've been short-staffed for months. The previous Duchess ran a much larger staff, but the Duke reduced numbers to cut costs. Then we need to discuss appropriate staffing levels, Lydia interrupted gently but firmly. I'm not looking to assign blame, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm looking to solve problems. If we need more maids, more footmen, more gardeners, then we'll hire them. But I expect the staff we do have to maintain standards befitting this house. The housekeeper's expression shifted from defensive to thoughtful. Yes, Your Grace. That would be most helpful. Good. Lydia looked around the room. I want each of you to prepare a report for me. Mr. Hendricks, I need to know the state of the household inventory and what supplies we're short on. Mrs. Blackwood, give me a detailed accounting of current staff, their responsibilities, and where you see gaps. Mr. Pemberton, she addressed the steward, I'll need information about the tenant farms, rents, and any outstanding issues with the estate lands. The steward's eyebrows rose. You want to involve yourself in estate management, Your Grace? That's typically the Duke's domain. The Duke has asked me to assist him in managing all aspects of Ravenscroft. That includes understanding the land and the people who live on it. Lydia kept her voice calm but allowed Steele to enter it. I hope that won't be a problem, Mr. Pemberton. No, Your Grace. Not at all. He bowed his head, but Lydia caught the flash of respect in his eyes. She dismissed the staff and sat alone in the morning room, her heart pounding. That had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She had just asserted her authority over people with decades more experience than she had, but they had listened. More than that, they had responded. That evening at dinner, a formal affair in a dining room that could seat 30, the Duke studied her across the long table. I hear you've already begun reorganizing the household, he said. Word travels fast. Lydia cut into her roasted lamb, trying to appear more confident than she felt. Mrs. Blackwood came to me in a state of confusion. She couldn't decide if she was insulted or relieved that someone was finally taking charge. A hint of amusement touched the Duke's voice. You made quite an impression. Was I too forceful? Lydia worried she had overstepped. No, you were exactly forceful enough. The Duke raised his wine glass slightly in salute. You identified problems, requested solutions, and made it clear you expect high standards. That's precisely what this estate needs. The approval warmed something in Lydia's chest. After weeks of being told she was worthless, inadequate, a burden, it felt startlingly good to be told she had done well. Over the following days, Lydia threw herself into learning everything about Ravenscroft Estate. She spent mornings with Mrs. Blackwood, learning the household systems and meeting every member of the staff individually. Afternoons were devoted to studying the estate accounts with Mr. Pemberton, trying to understand the complex web of tenant rents, agricultural production, and maintenance costs. It was exhausting. Her head spun with information about crop rotations, livestock management, staff schedules, and social obligations. But it was also thrilling. For the first time in her life, Lydia felt useful, needed. Her decisions mattered, affected people's lives in tangible ways. She discovered that 3 tenant families had fallen behind on rent because of illness and crop failures. Instead of evicting them, as the previous steward had recommended, Lydia arranged reduced payments and provided assistance with medical costs. The tenants' gratitude was overwhelming and humbling. She found that the estate's charitable donations to the local village school had been suspended to save money. Lydia restored them and doubled the amount, reasoning that educated tenants made better farmers. She hired 6 additional staff members, reorganized the work schedules to be more efficient, and instituted weekly meetings with department heads to address problems before they became crises. The Duke watched her transformation with something that might have been approval. He began seeking her opinion on estate matters, discussing decisions rather than simply informing her of them. Their conversations over dinner grew longer, more substantive. Lydia found herself looking forward to those evenings, to the intellectual challenge of discussing strategy with a mind as sharp as her own. The Duke never complimented her directly, but she could see his respect growing in the way he listened to her suggestions, the way he implemented her ideas. 2 weeks after their arrival at Ravenscroft, a letter arrived from London. Charlotte had written with news from society. "The scandal has reached new heights," Charlotte reported in her careful script. "Lord Holwell is telling everyone that you seduced the Duke out of desperation, that your marriage is nothing but a mercenary arrangement. Lady Pemberton claims you trapped his grace into matrimony using feminine wiles and false tears. They're painting you as a schemer, and the Duke as your victim." Lydia read the letter aloud to the Duke over breakfast. When she finished, she expected anger or concern. Instead, he laughed. It was the first time Lydia had heard him laugh, a genuine, rich sound that transformed his usually stern face. "They think you trapped me?" He shook his head, still smiling. "If they only knew. You tried to refuse my proposal 3 times before finally accepting." "Should we be worried about these rumors?" Lydia asked. "They could damage your reputation." "Let them talk. We'll be returning to London in 6 weeks for the season. That will be soon enough to address society's nonsense." The Duke's expression grew more serious. "Though I should warn you, it won't be pleasant. They'll try to humiliate you again, to prove you don't belong among them." "I know." Lydia folded Charlotte's letter carefully. "But I'm not the same woman who fled Ashford House in tears. I'm the Duchess of Ravenscroft now. Let them try to humiliate me. This time I'll be ready." The Duke's gray eyes gleamed with something that might have been pride. "Yes," he said softly, "I rather think you will be." But neither of them could have anticipated just how vicious society's attacks would become, or how the upcoming London season would test everything they had built together. The London season arrived like a gathering storm, and Lydia felt every warning tremor in her bones. 6 weeks of intensive preparation at Ravenscroft had transformed her from a disgraced merchant's daughter into something else entirely, a duchess who understood profit margins and crop yields, who could negotiate with tenant farmers and command a staff of 50. But Yorkshire competence, she was learning, meant nothing in London's glittering battlefield. The carriage rolled through Mayfair's familiar streets, and Lydia's stomach clenched with each passing block. The Duke sat across from her, reading correspondence as though they were simply returning from a country holiday rather than marching into social warfare. "You're nervous," he observed without looking up from his papers. "I'm terrified," Lydia admitted. "These people destroyed me once. They'll be eager to do it again." "Let them try." The Duke finally met her eyes, and she saw something fierce burning in those gray depths. "You're under my protection now. Anyone who attacks you attacks the Ravenscroft name. They'll think twice before attempting that." Lydia wished she shared his confidence. The Duke didn't understand how society's cruelty worked. The subtle cuts, the whispered rumors, the social exclusions that happened just outside his notice. Men like him were immune to such weapons. Women like her had no defense against them. The Ravenscroft London townhouse stood on Berkeley Square, a magnificent 4-story structure that announced wealth and power with every architectural flourish. Servants lined the entrance, bowing as Lydia and the Duke entered. Mrs. Hartwell, the London housekeeper, greeted them with considerably more warmth than Mrs. Blackwood had shown in Yorkshire. "Welcome, Your Grace." The older woman's smile seemed genuine. "We've prepared everything for the season. Your social calendar is already filling quite rapidly." Lydia took the offered schedule with growing dread. Balls, dinners, musicales, garden parties, a relentless parade of social obligations where she would be examined, judged, and dissected by the same people who had mocked her ruin. That evening, Charlotte came to call, slipping in through the servants' entrance to avoid being seen by society's watchful eyes. "Lydia!" She embraced her friend tightly. "You look wonderful. Yorkshire agrees with you." It was true. Regular meals, purposeful work, and freedom from constant anxiety had restored color to Lydia's cheeks and strength to her frame. She no longer looked like a woman barely surviving. "Tell me honestly," Lydia said as they settled in her private sitting room. "How bad is it?" Charlotte's expression turned grim. "Worse than I feared. Lady Pemberton and Lord Holwell have spent 6 weeks poisoning every well in London society. They're calling you a fortune hunter, a schemer, a woman who trapped the Duke into marriage through manipulation and deceit. And people believe them? Some do. Others are simply enjoying the scandal." Charlotte took Lydia's hand. "There's more. Lord Holwell's former fiancée, Lady Victoria Ashford, has returned from the continent. She and Adrian have apparently rekindled their relationship." Lydia felt a flash of bitter amusement. How convenient for them both. "Victoria is furious about your marriage to the Duke. Apparently she had set her sights on becoming Duchess herself before you appeared." Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's vowed to destroy you, Lydia. She's telling everyone that the Duke will tire of his charity case within the season and cast you aside." "Then I'll have to prove her wrong." Lydia spoke with more confidence than she felt. "The Duke and I have a partnership built on mutual respect. That's stronger than society's gossip." Charlotte looked uncertain. "Is it? Lydia, I know you've convinced yourself this arrangement is enough, but spending the season pretending to be happily married when you're really just business partners, that's going to be difficult." "We're not pretending anything. We're simply presenting a united front." Lydia stood and moved to the window, looking out at Berkeley Square's elegant facades. "The Duke made me a promise, Charlotte. No one will humiliate me again without answering to him. I'm trusting that promise." But trust, Lydia was about to discover, was easier to maintain in Yorkshire than in London's snake pit. The first test came 3 days later at Lady Worthington's ball, one of the season's earliest and most significant events. Every important family would attend, which meant everyone who had witnessed Lydia's previous humiliation would be there to see her return as a duchess. Lydia dressed with painstaking care in a gown of deep sapphire silk that had been commissioned from London's finest modiste. Diamonds, genuine Ravenscroft family diamonds, sparkled at her throat and ears. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken her lady's maid 2 hours to perfect. She looked every inch a duchess. Now she just had to convince herself she was one. The Duke appeared at her chamber door, resplendent in black evening clothes that emphasized his commanding height and broad shoulders. He stopped when he saw her, and something flickered in his expression that might have been appreciation. "You look formidable, Your Grace. I feel like I'm going into battle." "You are." He offered his arm. "But you won't be fighting alone." The ballroom at Worthington House blazed with light and overflowed with London's elite. The moment Lydia and the Duke were announced, conversation stuttered and died. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them, assessing, judging, hungry for scandal. Lydia felt her steps falter, memories of another ballroom crashing over her. The whispers, the stares, Adrian's cruel dismissal echoing in her ears. The Duke's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Steady," he murmured. "Remember who you are now. The Duchess of Ravenscroft, not a powerless girl anymore." Lydia lifted her chin and walked forward into the lion's den. Lady Worthington greeted them with cool politeness that barely masked her curiosity. "Your Grace, how delightful to see you return to London. And the new Duchess, such a surprise to us all." "I'm sure it was," Lydia replied evenly. "Thank you for including us in your guest list." They moved into the crowd, and Lydia felt the weight of scrutiny like physical pressure. Women she had once called friends looked through her as if she were invisible. Men she had danced with at previous balls turned away when she approached. The message was clear. Society had not forgiven her poverty, and they certainly hadn't accepted her sudden elevation to Duchess. "They're cutting you," the Duke observed quietly. "Every woman in this room is pretending you don't exist." "I noticed." Lydia kept her expression serene, despite the hurt blooming in her chest. "This is what I expected." "It's unacceptable." The Duke's jaw tightened. "These people have no grounds to snub a duchess." "They're not snubbing a duchess. They're punishing a merchant's daughter who dared to rise above her station." Lydia watched Lady Pemberton across the room, laughing with a group of society matrons. In their eyes, I'll never be anything but a fortune hunter who trapped you into marriage." Before the Duke could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Well, well, the pauper has found herself a patron." Lydia turned slowly to face Lord Adrian Hallwell. He stood with Lady Victoria Ashford on his arm, both wearing expressions of malicious satisfaction. Adrian looked exactly as she remembered, handsome, golden, utterly devoid of conscience. "Lord Hallwell." Lydia's voice emerged steady and cold. "And Lady Victoria. How lovely to see you both." "Is it?" Victoria's smile was poisonous. "I would have thought you'd prefer to avoid the people who know exactly what you are, Miss Whitmore. Or should I say, Your Grace?" She pronounced the title with mocking emphasis. "You should say Your Grace," the Duke interjected, his voice like granite. "My wife outranks you, Lady Victoria. I suggest you remember that." Victoria's face flushed, but Adrian laughed. "Come now, Ravenscroft. You can't expect us to bow and scrape to a woman we all know married you for your money. Everyone in London sees through this charade." "What charade would that be?" The Duke's tone had turned dangerous. "The charade that this is a real marriage." Adrian gestured dismissively toward Lydia. "You needed a duchess to manage your estates. She needed rescue from poverty. It's a business transaction dressed up as matrimony. Quite clever, really, but don't expect society to play along with the pretense." Lydia felt heat rising to her cheeks. How had they discovered the truth about her arrangement with the Duke? She and Nathaniel had been so careful to present themselves as a conventional couple. "You seem remarkably well informed about my private affairs," the Duke said quietly. "I wonder where you acquired such detailed knowledge." Victoria's smile widened. "A certain housekeeper in Yorkshire proved quite talkative when properly motivated. Apparently the Duke and Duchess maintain separate chambers, never dine privately together, and treat each other with all the warmth of business associates. Such a romantic match." Mrs. Blackwood. The housekeeper had never fully warmed to Lydia, and clearly she had found a way to profit from her resentment. Lydia felt betrayal cut deep, but she refused to show it. "My living arrangements are no concern of yours," she said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us—" "Oh, don't run away yet." Adrian stepped closer, and Lydia caught the sharp scent of whiskey on his breath. He had been drinking heavily. "I think society deserves to know the truth about the new Duchess of Ravenscroft, how she schemed and manipulated her way into a title she has no business holding. That's quite enough." The Duke's voice cracked like a whip, but Adrian was beyond caution now, emboldened by alcohol and Victoria's encouragement. His voice rose, carrying across the ballroom. "You want to know who Lydia Whitmore really is? She's a pauper's daughter who couldn't accept her proper place. She trapped a duke into marriage using feminine wiles and sob stories. She's playing at being a duchess, but underneath those borrowed diamonds, she's still nothing but—" The Duke's fist connected with Adrian's jaw with a sound like breaking branches. Adrian crashed backward into a refreshment table, sending crystal glasses and champagne bottles shattering across the marble floor. The ballroom erupted in gasps and screams. The orchestra stopped mid-note. 300 aristocrats stared in frozen shock at the Duke standing over Adrian's sprawled form, his knuckles bloodied and his expression murderous. "Say one more word about my wife," the Duke said in a voice that promised violence, "and I will end you. Title, fortune, reputation, all of it. Do you understand me?" Adrian scrambled to his feet, his jaw already swelling. "You struck me! You can't— I'll have satisfaction for this." "Then name your seconds." The Duke didn't back down an inch. "I'll be happy to meet you at dawn." A duel. He was challenging Adrian to a duel. Over her. Lydia's mind reeled. This was spiraling out of control. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. "Stop this, both of you." "Your Grace, this isn't necessary. It is entirely necessary." The Duke's eyes never left Adrian's face. "I warned you what would happen if anyone tried to humiliate you again. I meant it." Lord Worthington appeared, flanked by several other men, all looking scandalized and thrilled in equal measure. "Gentlemen, please. There are ladies present. This is most unseemly." "My apologies for disrupting your ball," the Duke said, his tone suggesting he wasn't sorry at all. "But I will not stand by while worthless cowards insult my wife." He turned to Lydia and offered his arm. "Come, Your Grace. The air in here has grown foul." They walked through the silent crowd toward the exit. Lydia kept her head high, but her thoughts churned chaotically. The Duke had just punched a lord in front of London society. He had challenged Adrian to a duel. All of this because Adrian had insulted her. This wasn't part of their business arrangement. This was something else entirely. Outside, the Duke handed her into their carriage with hands that trembled slightly, the only sign of how much the confrontation had cost him. "I'm sorry," he said once they were alone in the carriage's privacy. "I shouldn't have lost control like that. I've likely made things worse for you." "Made things worse?" Lydia stared at him. "You defended me. Publicly. Violently. No one has ever done that before. You're my duchess, my wife, my responsibility." The Duke's voice was rough with emotion. "When Halwell stood there spewing poison about you, calling you a schemer and a gold digger, suggesting you're unworthy of your position, something in me broke. But the duel, there won't be a duel." The Duke's expression turned grim. "Halwell is a coward. He'll apologize publicly before the week is out rather than face me across a dueling ground. But the message has been sent. Anyone who insults you insults House Ravenscroft. There will be consequences." Lydia's hands shook as she stripped off her long gloves. "They know about our arrangement. Someone told them this is a marriage of convenience." "Does it matter?" The Duke leaned back against the velvet seat. "Let them know. Let them speculate all they want. The fact remains that you are legally my duchess, and I will defend your position and honor against anyone who questions it." "But why?" The question burst from Lydia before she could stop it. "This wasn't part of our agreement. You promised me security and protection, not this. Not fighting duels and punching lords and turning yourself into a social pariah on my behalf." The Duke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and careful. "When I proposed to you, I believed this would be a simple business arrangement. I needed capable assistants managing my estates. You needed security, a clean transaction with clear terms. And I was wrong." He met her eyes in the dim carriage light. "These past 2 months, watching you transform Ravenscroft, seeing you learn and adapt and lead, you've become more than an employee or business partner. You've become—" He paused, searching for words. "You've become someone I respect, someone I value, someone I will not allow society to destroy." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory, far beyond the safe boundaries of their practical arrangement. "Your Grace—" "Nathaniel," he interrupted. "When we're alone, I'd prefer you call me Nathaniel." Nathaniel. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way their formal titles had never been. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." He looked away, toward the window where London streets flashed past. "I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I'm simply acknowledging that my own feelings have become complicated, but that doesn't change our arrangement unless you wish it to. Your security is guaranteed regardless of whether this marriage remains purely practical or becomes something more." Something more. The possibility hung between them like a fragile bubble, beautiful and terrifying. Before Lydia could respond, the carriage lurched to a sudden stop. Shouts erupted outside, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Nathaniel moved instantly, positioning himself between Lydia and the carriage door. "Stay behind me!" The door flew open, and a mob of faces appeared. Not aristocrats now, but common folk, angry and desperate. A woman thrust a crying baby toward the carriage. "Duchess!" she screamed. "My baby's starving. You promised to help the village, but nothing's changed. My husband lost his job at the textile mill, and we've got nothing." More voices joined hers, a chorus of grievance and rage. "You take our rents, but do nothing for us." "The Duke don't care about common folk. Rich parasites, all of you." Lydia's mind raced. These weren't random protesters. They were organized. Someone had gathered them here, armed them with specific complaints designed to make her look incompetent or uncaring. "Please," she called over the noise, leaning toward the carriage door despite Nathaniel's protective arm. "If you'll just listen." A rock smashed through the carriage window, showering them both with glass. Lydia felt a sharp sting across her cheek where a shard had cut her. Nathaniel roared for the driver to move, but the crowd had surrounded the carriage, preventing escape. More rocks followed, along with rotten vegetables and filth. The crowd's anger was building towards something dangerous. Then, cutting through the chaos, a familiar voice rang out. "Enough!" The crowd parted, and Victoria Ashford appeared, dressed in simple clothes that mimicked working-class garments, though made of far finer materials than any laborer could afford. She raised her hands for silence. "Friends," she addressed the mob, "I understand your anger. This woman promises help but delivers nothing. She plays at being a duchess while you suffer, but violence isn't the answer. Let her see your faces. Let her understand what her negligence has cost you. Let her explain why she's failed you." It was masterfully done. Victoria had orchestrated this entire scene, hired these desperate people, fed them partial truths mixed with lies, positioned them here to ambush the carriage. And now she was positioning herself as their champion, while simultaneously ensuring Lydia couldn't respond without appearing defensive or uncaring. Lydia met Victoria's triumphant gaze through the broken carriage window and understood. This was war. Not the polite social warfare of ballroom snubs and whispered gossip, but something far more dangerous. Victoria intended to destroy Lydia's reputation so thoroughly that even the Duke's protection couldn't save her. "We should go," Nathaniel said urgently, blood running from a cut on his forehead where glass had struck him. "Now, before this turns into a riot." But Lydia was done running. She had fled one ballroom in tears and disgrace. She would not flee another confrontation. No. She pushed past Nathaniel's protective arm and climbed down from the carriage, standing before the angry crowd in her expensive ball gown and Ravenscroft diamonds. "Your Grace, don't—" Nathaniel reached for her, but she was already moving. "You want to know why your lives haven't improved?" Lydia called out, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Because changes take time. The textile mill closed because the owner invested in bad machinery and drove the company into bankruptcy. That's not the Duke's fault or mine. But we're working to establish new employment opportunities in the villages surrounding Ravenscroft lands." "Lies," someone shouted. "You rich folk always promise and never deliver." "I don't make promises I can't keep." Lydia stepped closer to the crowd, ignoring Nathaniel's sharp intake of breath. "In Yorkshire, we've already implemented relief programs for tenant families in need. We've reopened the village school with increased funding. We've hired additional workers for estate maintenance and agricultural projects. These things are happening. They're real. But London isn't Yorkshire, and I can't fix every problem in England." She turned to face Victoria directly. "But I can identify who's really responsible for your suffering. This woman," she pointed at Victoria, "hired you for this performance. She paid you to attack our carriage and accuse me of negligence. She doesn't care about your genuine grievances. She's using you as weapons in a personal vendetta." Victoria's face went white, then red. "That's a lie. I'm trying to help these people see the truth about you." "Are you?" Lydia pulled a small purse from her reticule and held it up. "I'm offering £50 to anyone who'll testify that Lady Victoria paid them to be here tonight. £50. Probably more than you'd earn in 6 months of honest labor." The crowd stirred uncertainly. A man near the front spoke up. "She gave us 5 shillings each and said the Duchess was responsible for the mill closing, said we should make her answer for it." More voices joined in, confirming the story. Victoria had orchestrated everything, feeding them lies and partial truths to weaponize their genuine desperation. Victoria's carefully constructed scheme crumbled before her eyes. She turned and fled into the darkness, leaving chaos in her wake. But the crowd's anger hadn't fully dissipated. They were still hungry, still desperate, still looking for someone to blame for their suffering. "I know you're struggling," Lydia said more gently. "I know what it's like to be powerless and poor. 2 months ago, I was living in rented rooms in Cheapside, counting every penny, watching my mother waste away because we couldn't afford proper medicine. I understand desperation." She saw surprise ripple through the crowd. This wasn't the story aristocratic ladies told. "I can't fix everything," Lydia continued, "but I can promise you this. The Ravenscroft estates will always prioritize fair treatment of workers and tenants. If you live on our lands, you'll be treated with dignity and given opportunities to earn honest wages. And if you have genuine grievances, real problems, not manufactured scandals, you can bring them to me directly. Every Tuesday morning, I'll hold open sessions at the Ravenscroft townhouse. Anyone can come and speak with me about their concerns. Why should we trust you? A woman called out. Because I'm giving you my word. And because, unlike the people who tried to use you tonight, I'm offering you actual help instead of empty manipulation. Lydia pulled out more coins. Take this money. Feed your families tonight. And if you want real assistance finding work or resolving problems, come see me on Tuesday. I'll listen. The crowd's mood shifted, anger transforming into uncertainty and then cautious hope. They took the money Lydia offered, not the £50 she'd mentioned earlier, but enough to buy food and fuel for immediate needs. As they dispersed, Nathaniel appeared at Lydia's side, his expression unreadable. That was either brilliantly brave or stunningly reckless, he said quietly. Probably both. Lydia's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Did I just promise open sessions every Tuesday? What was I thinking? You were thinking like a duchess. Nathaniel's voice held unmistakable pride. A real one, not the decorative ornament society expects. You saw people in need and found a way to help them while exposing Victoria's manipulations. That was extraordinary. Lydia looked at the blood on his face, the broken carriage window, her own torn gown and diamond necklace now missing several stones. They were both bleeding and exhausted, standing in a dark London street surrounded by the debris of Victoria's failed attack. This is only going to get worse, she said. Victoria won't stop. And now that society knows about our arrangement, they'll be watching for any sign that this marriage is falling apart. Then we'll have to show them something they don't expect. Nathaniel's hand found hers, his fingers warm and strong. A partnership that's stronger than their gossip. A marriage that works precisely because it's built on honesty and mutual respect rather than romantic delusions. Is that what we have? Lydia looked up at him. Mutual respect? Among other things. His gray eyes held hers, and Lydia saw something in them that made her breath catch. I respect you, Lydia. I admire you. And somewhere between Yorkshire and tonight, I started to care for you in ways that have nothing to do with estate management or social obligations. Lydia's heart hammered wildly. Nathaniel, I'm not asking you to reciprocate, he interrupted gently. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but I wanted you to know. After tonight, after watching you face down an angry mob with nothing but courage and compassion, I wanted you to know. Before Lydia could respond, shouts erupted from the direction Victoria had fled. Then came the sound every Londoner dreaded, the bells ringing to signal fire. They ran toward the commotion and found flames engulfing a warehouse 2 blocks away. The building stored textiles and dry goods, and the fire was spreading rapidly toward the surrounding structures, including a tenement building where dozens of families lived. We need to evacuate those buildings, Nathaniel said immediately, already moving. But Lydia's attention had caught on something else. In the crowd watching the fire, she saw Victoria's distinctive profile, illuminated by the orange glow. And Victoria was smiling. This was no accident. Victoria had set this fire deliberately, perhaps hoping to blame it on the mob she'd gathered, perhaps simply striking out in rage after her plan failed. And if those tenements burned, dozens of innocent people would die. Lydia grabbed Nathaniel's arm. Victoria started this fire. I saw her. This is attempted murder. Then we stop her after we save these people. Nathaniel was already organizing the crowd, directing men to form bucket brigades and sending others to break down tenement doors. Lydia joined the effort, her ball gown becoming soaked and ruined as she helped pass buckets of water. Smoke burned her lungs. Heat scorched her face. Around her, people screamed and cried and fought desperately to save their homes. This was Victoria's answer to defeat, complete destruction. If she couldn't ruin Lydia socially, she would destroy her physically and take innocence with her. Through the smoke and chaos, Lydia saw Victoria watching from the shadows, her face twisted with hate and satisfaction. Their eyes met across the burning street, and Lydia understood with perfect clarity. This war would only end when one of them was completely destroyed. The fire burned for 3 hours before they finally contained it. By the time the last flames were extinguished, Lydia's ball gown hung in charred tatters, her face was streaked with soot, and her hands were raw from passing water buckets. But the tenement building had been saved, not a single life lost. Nathaniel found her sitting on the curb, gulping air that still tasted of smoke. His evening clothes were destroyed, his face blackened, but his eyes blazed with fierce energy. "Victoria's gone," he said without preamble. "Disappeared the moment the fire was under control. But I have witnesses who saw her near the warehouse before the flames started. Enough to bring charges if we choose." "If we choose?" Lydia looked up at him. "She tried to burn down a building full of families. Of course we're bringing charges." "Are we?" Nathaniel sat beside her on the filthy curb, heedless of his ruined clothes. "Think about what that means. A public trial. Victoria's family is powerful. The Ashfords will fight back with everything they have. It will be months of legal battles, testimony, society watching our every move. And Victoria will claim you fabricated evidence because of the rivalry between you." Lydia's hands clenched into fists. "So, she gets away with attempted murder because prosecution would be inconvenient?" "I'm not saying that." Nathaniel's voice was careful. "I'm saying we need to be strategic. Victoria made a mistake tonight. She let her hatred drive her to criminal action. We can use that, but only if we're smart about how we proceed." Before Lydia could respond, a figure emerged from the crowd of exhausted firefighters. Charlotte, her own dress ruined and face smudged, rushed forward and embraced Lydia tightly. "Thank heaven you're alive. When I heard about the fire, I thought—" Charlotte pulled back, examining Lydia's soot-covered face. "Are you hurt?" "Bruised and exhausted, but whole." Lydia managed a tired smile. "What are you doing here?" "I was at Lady Worthington's ball when news spread about the attack on your carriage. Half of London society followed the gossip trail to see what happened next." Charlotte's expression turned grim. "They're all still watching, Lydia. This whole disaster is going to be the scandal of the season." "Let them watch." Lydia stood, her legs shaking but her spine straight. "I'm done hiding from society's judgment. Tonight Victoria tried to destroy me and failed. Now it's my turn." Nathaniel rose beside her, one eyebrow raised. "What exactly do you have in mind?" "The Tuesday sessions I promised. We're starting them tomorrow." Lydia's mind raced through possibilities. "And not just for complaints. I want to hire staff from the people we saved tonight, give them jobs, prove that the Ravenscroft name stands for something more than empty titles and social games." "You want to hire tenement dwellers to work in a ducal household?" Charlotte sounded shocked. "Lydia, society will never accept—" "I don't care what society accepts." Lydia turned to Nathaniel. "Unless you object? They're your estates, your reputation." "There are estates. Our reputation." Nathaniel's hand found hers, his grip warm and solid. "And I think it's a brilliant idea. Society wants to paint you as a scheming fortune hunter. Show them a duchess who actually cares about the people she's supposed to serve. Victoria wants to destroy you through scandal? Build something so substantial that her gossip looks petty by comparison." Charlotte stared at them both as if they'd lost their minds. "Do you understand what you're proposing? Every aristocrat in London will turn against you. They'll call you radicals, revolutionaries. The scandal will never die." "Good." Lydia's voice held steel. "Let them be scandalized. I'd rather be notorious for helping people than celebrated for doing nothing." The next morning, despite having slept only 3 hours, Lydia stood in the Ravenscroft townhouse's grand entrance hall as dozens of people lined up for the first Tuesday session. News of the fire had spread through London's working districts like wildfire itself, and the crowd was larger than she'd anticipated. Mrs. Hartwell looked scandalized at the queue of common folk trailing through her pristine hallways, but she held her tongue at Nathaniel's warning glance. Lydia met with each person individually in the study, listening to their stories with genuine attention. A widow whose husband had died in a factory accident, leaving her with 3 children and no income. A young man injured at work, unable to find employment because of his limp. An elderly couple facing eviction because their landlord wanted to raise rents. For some, Lydia offered jobs on the Ravenscroft estates, maintenance work, kitchen staff, stable hands. For others, she wrote letters of recommendation or provided small loans to help them through immediate crises. She couldn't solve every problem, but she could make a tangible difference in individual lives. By noon, word had spread through fashionable London about the Duchess holding court with common folk. By evening, the gossip had reached fever pitch. "She's meeting with street sweepers and factory workers," Lady Pemberton complained loudly at her afternoon tea. letting them track dirt through a ducal residence. It's unseemly. It's revolutionary, countered Lady Worthington, who had witnessed both the ballroom confrontation and heard reports of the fire rescue. The girl saved a building full of families last night. Say what you will about her origins, but she has more courage than anyone gave her credit for. The divide in society's opinion was immediate and stark. The old guard, led by Lady Pemberton and the Ashford family, condemned Lydia as a radical upstart who didn't understand proper aristocratic behavior. But a younger faction, intrigued by the drama and impressed by Lydia's actions during the fire, began quietly supporting her. Charlotte brought news of the shifting sentiment when she visited 3 days later. "You're the talk of London," she reported. "Half the city thinks you're a dangerous radical. The other half thinks you're a hero. No one is neutral." "What about Victoria?" Lydia asked. "Has anyone connected her to the fire?" Charlotte's expression darkened. "She's telling everyone she was nowhere near the warehouse. Claims she was at home all evening with witnesses who'll swear to it. The Ashford family is closing ranks around her." "Of course they are." Lydia wasn't surprised. Aristocratic families protected their own, even when their own were criminals. "What about Adrian?" "He's been silent since the ballroom incident. Rumor is the Duke's challenge terrified him. He's staying in his country estate, claiming illness." Charlotte leaned forward. "But Lydia, you need to be careful. The Ashfords are furious about the accusations against Victoria. They're planning something." The warning proved prescient. 2 days later, a letter arrived addressed to the Duchess of Ravenscroft in precise, elegant script. Lydia opened it to find a formal invitation to Lady Pemberton's annual summer ball, the most exclusive event of the season. The invitation was perfectly polite, but Lydia understood the subtext immediately. This was a summons, not an invitation. Lady Pemberton wanted Lydia to appear before London society, so they could pass final judgment on her worthiness. "It's a trap," Nathaniel said flatly when she showed him the invitation. "Pemberton is Victoria's aunt. They'll use the ball to humiliate you publicly." "Probably." Lydia studied the elegant cardstock. "But if I refuse to attend, they'll claim I'm afraid to face society, that I know I'm not worthy of my position. You have nothing to prove to these people." "Don't I?" Lydia met his eyes. 2 months ago, I fled a ballroom in tears because I couldn't face their judgment. If I run again now, Victoria wins. She'll have proven that I'm still the same powerless girl who can be destroyed by gossip and cruelty. "You're not that girl anymore." Nathaniel's voice was fierce. "Anyone with eyes can see that." "Then let's make sure society sees it too." Lydia set down the invitation with finality. "We're attending Lady Pemberton's ball, and we're going to end this war once and for all." The week before the ball passed in a blur of preparation. Lydia continued her Tuesday sessions, which had grown so popular that she had to extend them to Thursdays as well. She hired 15 new staff members from London's working districts, integrating them into the household over Mrs. Hartwell's increasingly faint protests. She also quietly gathered evidence about Victoria's involvement in the fire. Witness statements, testimony from people who had seen her near the warehouse, records proving she had purchased lamp oil and rags earlier that day. Nothing definitive enough to guarantee a conviction, but enough to raise serious questions about her innocence. Charlotte helped track down the housekeeper who had betrayed Lydia's secrets to Victoria. Mrs. Blackwood, it turned out, had been dismissed from Ravenscroft estate after stealing silver to sell in York. Her testimony about the Duke and Duchess's living arrangements had been motivated by spite and profit, not truth. Though some of it was true, Lydia admitted to Nathaniel one evening as they reviewed the evidence in his study. "We do maintain separate chambers. We did treat this as a business arrangement." "Did." Nathaniel set down the papers he'd been reading. Past tense. "Is that how you see it now?" Lydia's breath caught. They had been dancing around this topic for days, ever since the night of the fire when Nathaniel had admitted his feelings were becoming complicated. "I don't know what I see anymore. Everything has changed so quickly." "Has it changed how you feel about me?" The question was quiet, vulnerable in a way Nathaniel rarely allowed himself to be. Lydia thought about the past 2 months. The Duke who had offered her a cold business arrangement had become Nathaniel, a man who defended her honor with violence, who stood beside her while she fought fires and challenged society, who looked at her with something far warmer than professional respect. "Yes," she admitted, "it has changed how I feel. I just don't know what to call these feelings yet." "Then don't call them anything." Nathaniel moved closer, his hand reaching up to touch her face with surprising gentleness. "We have time to figure out what this is becoming. For now, it's enough to know we're in this together." Lydia leaned into his touch, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "I'm terrified of the ball. Victoria will have planned something devastating, some revelation or humiliation designed to destroy me." "Then we'll face it together." Nathaniel's thumb brushed across her cheek. "Whatever she throws at us, we'll handle it. You're not alone anymore, Lydia." The night of Lady Pemberton's ball arrived with unseasonable warmth that made London's air thick and heavy. Lydia dressed in a gown of deep crimson, a deliberate choice. Crimson was bold, unapologetic, the color of blood and war. She wore the full Ravenscroft diamonds, including the spectacular tiara that had belonged to Nathaniel's mother. When she descended the staircase, Nathaniel stopped mid-stride and stared. "You look like a warrior queen," he said. "Good. That's exactly what I need to be tonight." The ballroom at Pemberton House was even more magnificent than Ashford's had been, decorated in white and gold with thousands of candles creating a dreamlike glow. But the atmosphere was anything but dreamy. The crowd parted as Lydia and Nathaniel entered, creating a corridor of hostile stares and whispered commentary. Lady Pemberton greeted them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your Grace, how delightful that you could attend. We were so worried you might decline." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Lydia replied with matching false sweetness. Victoria stood near the terrace doors, surrounded by her usual coterie of supporters. She wore white, virginal, innocent white, and her smile when she saw Lydia was pure poison. The first hour passed in tense social maneuvering. Lydia danced with several men who approached more out of curiosity than respect. She endured cutting remarks from society matrons who made their contempt barely veiled. Through it all, Nathaniel remained at her side, a solid presence that gave her strength. Then, at the stroke of midnight, Lady Pemberton called for silence. "Friends," she announced from the center of the ballroom, her voice carrying to every corner, "tonight we celebrate the season's triumphs and acknowledge the year's most remarkable events, including, of course, the Duke of Ravenscroft's unexpected marriage." The crowd tittered with anticipation. This was what they'd been waiting for. "Such a romantic story," Lady Pemberton continued with false enthusiasm. "A duke rescuing a ruined woman from poverty. How very charitable. How very convenient." Nathaniel's hand tightened on Lydia's arm, but she shook her head slightly. "Let this play out." Victoria had engineered this moment, and Lydia needed to see the full extent of the attack before responding. "Of course, we've all heard the rumors," Lady Pemberton went on, "that the marriage is merely a business arrangement, that the Duchess trapped our dear Duke into matrimony through manipulation and desperation. Some even suggest she orchestrated the entire scheme, from her family's financial ruin to the convenient encounter that led to the proposal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was more direct than anyone had expected. Victoria stepped forward, her expression carefully crafted to show reluctant honesty. "I hate to speak against anyone, but truth must be told. I have evidence that Miss Whitmore, the Duchess, planned this entire situation. Her father's financial collapse wasn't accidental. She convinced him to make the ruinous investments that destroyed their fortune, knowing it would make her desperate enough to accept any proposal. She orchestrated her own poverty to trap a wealthy husband. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that for a moment Lydia could only stare in disbelief. Then she laughed. The sound cut through the ballroom's shocked silence like a knife. Lydia laughed with genuine amusement, as if Victoria had told the most absurd joke imaginable. "You think this is funny?" Victoria's face flushed with anger. "I think it's hilarious." Lydia wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. "You're actually suggesting that I, at 19 years old, convinced my father, a successful merchant with 30 years of business experience, to deliberately bankrupt himself. That I manipulated him into destroying our family fortune, condemning my mother to poverty and illness, and reducing myself to living in squalor. all as part of an elaborate scheme to trap a duke I had never even met. Is that your claim? Put so bluntly, the accusation sounded absurd. Doubt flickered across several faces in the crowd. You were desperate, Victoria insisted. Everyone knows your family was in financial trouble for months before the collapse. You saw an opportunity and took it. My family's financial troubles were real and devastating. Lydia's voice hardened. My father made poor investments based on bad advice from men he trusted. It destroyed him. He died of apoplexy 3 weeks after losing everything, and I couldn't even afford a proper funeral. My mother nearly died from the stress and grief. I watched her waste away while I counted pennies to buy bread. That was my reality, Lady Victoria. Not some clever scheme, real suffering, real loss, real desperation. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Many of these aristocrats had never heard poverty described so starkly by one of their own. But you did trap the Duke, Lady Pemberton interjected. You can't deny that your marriage was a calculated transaction. I don't deny it. Lydia turned to face the entire assembled crowd. The Duke proposed a marriage of convenience, and I accepted. He needed a duchess capable of managing his estates. I needed security for myself and my dying mother. We were honest with each other about our motivations. Is that so different from every other aristocratic marriage? How many of you married for love rather than money, titles, or family alliances? Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the crowd. She had struck a nerve. The difference, Lydia continued, is that we were honest about the arrangement. No false promises, no pretend romance, no lies about eternal devotion, just two people making a practical decision to help each other. That honesty seems to offend you more than any amount of fashionable hypocrisy would. Honesty? Victoria's voice rose shrilly. You want to talk about honesty? Then let's discuss the fire. The one you claim I started but have no proof of. Another convenient tragedy that makes you look like a hero while painting me as a villain. I have proof. Lydia spoke quietly, but her words carried. Witnesses who saw you near the warehouse before the flames started. Records of your purchases that day. Lamp oil, rags, materials perfect for starting fires. Testimony from people you hired to attack our carriage, who heard you express murderous rage toward me. Victoria's face went white. Those are lies. Fabrications from people you paid. I can corroborate the Duchess's account. The new voice came from the ballroom entrance. Everyone turned to see Charlotte standing there, accompanied by 3 other women Lydia recognized, servants from Pemberton House itself. Charlotte walked forward, her expression resolute. I witnessed Lady Victoria returning to this house on the night of the fire, her dress reeking of smoke and lamp oil. These women helped her change clothes and dispose of the evidence. We stayed silent out of fear, but we can't anymore. Not when an innocent woman is being accused of crimes she didn't commit. Lady Pemberton's face turned purple with rage. This is preposterous. These servants are lying. Charlotte, how dare you? How dare I tell the truth? Charlotte's voice shook but held firm. I've watched you and your niece destroy people for sport. I've stayed silent while you spread lies and ruined reputations. But I won't be silent anymore. The Duchess has shown more courage and compassion in 2 months than you've shown in your entire life. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Some people shouted support for Victoria. Others demanded answers. Still others simply stood in shocked silence. Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. Enough! Lady Victoria attempted murder and has spent weeks trying to destroy my wife through lies and manipulation. I'm formally pressing charges against her for arson and attempted murder. The evidence will be presented to a magistrate tomorrow morning. You can't do this, Victoria shrieked. My family will destroy you. The Ashfords are one of the most powerful families in England, and the Ravenscrofts are older and richer. Nathaniel's voice was ice. Choose your battles carefully, Lady Victoria. This is one you cannot win. Lord Ashford pushed through the crowd, his face mottled with fury. How dare you threaten my daughter? This is outrageous. We'll sue you for slander, for harassment. Sue away. Lydia stepped beside Nathaniel, presenting a united front. But the evidence is real, and it will be made public. Your daughter tried to burn down a building full of innocent families out of petty jealousy. That's not slander, that's truth. For a long moment, the ballroom balanced on a knife's edge. Then Adrian Hallwell, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward. It's true. Everyone turned to stare at him. He looked terrible. Gaunt, pale, clearly drunk despite the early hour. Victoria told me her plan, Adrian continued, his words slurring slightly. She was furious after the carriage incident failed. She wanted to hurt Lydia, to prove she was still in control. I tried to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't listen. She bought the materials and set the fire. I saw her do it. Victoria lunged toward him, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. You coward! You promised you'd support me. You said— I said a lot of things when I thought we could get away with it. Adrian's laugh was bitter. But I'm not going to prison for you, Victoria. I'm not that much of a fool. The betrayal was complete. Victoria stood exposed before all of London society, her crimes confirmed by her own co-conspirator. Lady Pemberton sagged against a nearby table, looking suddenly old. Victoria, tell me this isn't true. But Victoria's face had transformed into a mask of pure hatred. Of course it's true. She deserved it. This nobody, this pauper's daughter. She took everything that should have been mine. The Duke should have married me, not some pathetic charity case. The confession fell like a thunderbolt. No amount of family influence could protect Victoria now. Lord Ashford grabbed his daughter's arm. We're leaving, now. Don't say another word. They fled through the silent crowd, followed by the sound of Victoria's incoherent screaming. Lady Pemberton, her social standing destroyed by association, hurried after them. The ballroom remained frozen in shock for several heartbeats. Then, slowly, the crowd began to turn toward Lydia with new eyes. Lady Worthington was the first to speak. She stepped forward and curtsied, a genuine curtsy showing real respect. Your Grace, she said clearly, I owe you an apology. I judged you harshly based on gossip and assumption, but tonight you've shown more grace and courage than most of us could manage in a lifetime. I would be honored to call you friend. Other voices joined hers, a chorus of apologies and newfound respect. Not everyone. Some aristocrats still looked scandalized, still disapproved of Lydia's common origins and radical methods. But enough people stepped forward in support that the balance of power shifted visibly. Charlotte embraced Lydia tightly. You did it. You actually won. We did it. Lydia looked at Nathaniel, at Charlotte, at the servants who had risked their positions to tell the truth. All of us together. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with shock and speculation, Nathaniel led Lydia out onto the terrace where they had first spoken on that terrible night months ago. How do you feel? He asked. Lydia leaned against the balustrade and looked out at London's glittering lights. Exhausted, relieved, terrified about what comes next. What comes next is we go home to Yorkshire. Nathaniel moved beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. We continue the work we started. We build something real and good, regardless of what society thinks. And us? Lydia turned to face him. What happens with us? Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I told you my feelings had become complicated. That was a coward's way of saying, I've fallen in love with you. Somewhere between Yorkshire and tonight, the woman I married out of convenience became the woman I can't imagine living without. Lydia's heart stopped, then started racing. Nathaniel, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted quickly. I know this isn't what you agreed to. I know you might never feel the same way, but after tonight, after watching you face down society with nothing but truth and courage, I couldn't keep pretending my feelings were merely professional respect. Lydia reached up and touched his face, her hand trembling slightly. You want to know something? I spent 2 months convincing myself this was just a business arrangement, that I was grateful for your protection and respected your intelligence, but nothing more. I was lying to myself. Hope flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. Were you? Completely. Lydia smiled through sudden tears. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe when you defended me at that first ball. Maybe when you trusted me with your estates. Maybe when you stood beside me while I fought fires and challenged society. But somewhere along the way, my practical Duke became the man I love, the man I want to build a real life with, not just a convenient arrangement. Nathaniel pulled her close, and for the first time since their wedding, he kissed her. It was gentle and fierce at once, tasting of champagne and smoke and promise. When they finally pulled apart, Lydia was breathless and smiling. So, Nathaniel said, his voice rough with emotion, I suppose we should renegotiate our marriage contract. The current terms don't account for this development. What development? Lydia asked innocently. The one where we're actually in love with each other. Ah, that, Lydia pretended to consider. I suppose we could add an amendment, something about partnership becoming partnership plus devotion, mutual respect evolving into mutual adoration, and separate chambers becoming shared chambers. Nathaniel's eyebrow rose hopefully. Lydia laughed, the sound free and joyful. I think that can be arranged. They stood together on the terrace while London society continued to buzz inside about the night's revelations. The scandal would continue for weeks, probably months. Victoria and the Ashfords would face legal consequences. Society would remain divided about Lydia's worthiness. But none of that mattered anymore. The war was won. Not through violence or manipulation, but through truth and courage and love forged in adversity's fire. Lydia had survived poverty, betrayal, public humiliation, and attempted murder. She had transformed from powerless victim to powerful duchess, and she had found something she'd stopped believing in: real love, honest and hard-won. Ready to go home? Nathaniel asked, offering his arm. Lydia took it, standing tall beside him. Yes, let's go home. They left London the next morning before society could fully process the previous night's revelations. The carriage rolled north through England's countryside as dawn broke over fields still wet with morning dew, and Lydia watched the city disappear behind them with profound relief. No regrets? Nathaniel asked, his hand warm over hers. Only that we didn't leave sooner. Lydia leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that would have been impossible a month ago. Though I suppose we needed to face them eventually. Running would have solved nothing. You didn't run. You stood your ground and won. Pride colored his voice. Victoria's facing criminal charges. The Ashford family's reputation is in tatters. Adrian's confession destroyed any remaining credibility they had. And you've been publicly vindicated by the very society that tried to destroy you. Lydia thought about Victoria's face as she'd been dragged from the ballroom, twisted with hatred and defeat. Part of her felt pity for the woman who'd let jealousy corrupt her so completely, but mostly she felt relief that the war was finally over. What will happen to her? She asked. Prison, most likely. Attempted murder and arson carry serious penalties, even for aristocrats. Nathaniel's expression was grim. Her father will try to buy her way out, but with Adrian's testimony and the servant's corroboration, the evidence is overwhelming. Victoria will face justice. And Adrian? Turned King's evidence to save himself, coward to the end. Nathaniel's lip curled in disgust. He'll avoid prison, but his reputation is destroyed. No decent family will associate with him now. Lydia should have felt satisfaction at her former fiancé's downfall, but she felt only emptiness where anger used to live. Adrian was irrelevant now, a ghost from a life that no longer mattered. The journey to Yorkshire took 3 days, and they were the happiest 3 days of Lydia's life. No longer bound by the careful distance they'd maintained, she and Nathaniel talked for hours, about everything and nothing. They shared stories from their childhoods, debated philosophy and politics, laughed at absurdities, and grew serious discussing their plans for Ravenscroft's future. At night, when they stopped at coaching inns, Nathaniel no longer retreated to separate rooms. They shared chambers like the married couple they were finally becoming, and Lydia discovered that the partnership she'd valued could transform into something far more intimate without losing any of its strength. When Ravenscroft Estate finally appeared through the trees, Lydia felt something she'd never experienced in London, the sensation of coming home. Mrs. Blackwood was gone, of course, dismissed for her betrayal. In her place stood Mrs. Davies, a capable woman from the village who had proven herself during Lydia's reorganization efforts. She greeted them with genuine warmth and a detailed report of everything that had occurred during their absence. The new tenant agreements are working well, Your Grace, Mrs. Davies reported as they walked through the estate. 3 families have already paid their first month's rent under the adjusted terms, and they've expressed gratitude for the reduced rates during harvest season. And the school? Lydia asked. Enrollment has doubled since we increased funding. The teacher says several students show remarkable aptitude, particularly in mathematics. She's requested additional books and materials. Provide whatever she needs. Lydia made a mental note to visit the school herself soon. Education is an investment in Ravenscroft's future. Over the following weeks, Lydia threw herself into the work she'd begun before the London season. But now she worked with new confidence, secure in her position and her partnership with Nathaniel. The estate flourished under their joint management, crops yielded better harvests, tenant satisfaction increased, and the household ran with smooth efficiency. More importantly, their marriage flourished. The business arrangement had transformed into genuine partnership, professional respect had deepened into love, and separate lives had merged into something stronger than either could have built alone. One morning in early autumn, Lydia sat in the estate office reviewing quarterly reports when Mrs. Davies entered with a visitor. "Your Grace, there's a young woman here asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent." The visitor was perhaps 20, dressed in modest but clean clothes, her face showing the determined anxiety of someone who'd worked up courage for this encounter. "Your Grace," she curtsied awkwardly, "my name is Mary Porter. I'm from the tenement building you saved during the fire. I heard about your Tuesday sessions in London, and I was hoping, that is, I need help, and I didn't know where else to turn." Lydia gestured for her to sit. "Tell me what's wrong, Mary." The story spilled out in a rush. Mary's brother had been conscripted into the army through fraud. Recruiters had gotten him drunk and forged his signature on enlistment papers. Now he was stationed at a fort in Scotland, miserable and desperate to come home to help support their widowed mother. "They won't let him leave," Mary said, tears streaming down her face. "I've written to officers, to the War Office, to everyone I can think of. But no one listens to people like us. We don't matter to them." Lydia felt the familiar burn of anger at systemic injustice. "Do you have proof of the fraud?" "Witnesses who saw the recruiters get him drunk. A letter from my brother describing what happened. But what good is proof when no one with power cares?" "Someone with power cares now." Lydia stood decisively. "Give me all your documentation. I'll write to the War Office myself. And if they ignore a duchess the way they ignored you, I'll travel to London and knock on doors until someone listens." Mary stared at her in disbelief. "You would do that? For someone like me? For someone who's been wronged and needs help?" "Absolutely." Lydia squeezed the young woman's hand. "I told those people at the fire that I understand desperation, that I would listen and help when I could. I meant it." Word of Mary's case spread through the surrounding villages, and the Tuesday sessions that Lydia had established in London were soon replicated at Ravenscroft. Every week people came with problems, both large and small, disputes with landlords, difficulty finding work, children who needed medical care they couldn't afford. Lydia couldn't solve every problem, but she could make a difference. She used the Ravenscroft name and wealth strategically, pressuring officials, funding initiatives, creating opportunities for people who had never had access to power before. The War Office, faced with the Duchess's persistent letters and the threat of public scandal, investigated Mary's brother's case. Within 6 weeks, he was honorably discharged and returned home to his grateful family. News of the success spread further. More people came seeking help. Lydia hired additional staff to manage the growing workload, transforming what had been informal charity into a systematic approach to addressing social inequities. Society noticed. Letters began arriving from London, some praising Lydia's efforts, others condemning her radical methods. She was called everything from the People's Duchess to a dangerous revolutionary in silk and diamonds. Nathaniel found her reading one particularly vitriolic letter from Lady Pemberton, who had resurfaced after weeks of hiding following Victoria's arrest. "She's calling you a threat to the social order," he observed, reading over her shoulder. "Says you're encouraging servants and tenants to forget their proper place." "Good." Lydia set down the letter. "Maybe they should forget their proper place. Maybe everyone should have the opportunity to rise above the circumstances of their birth." "You realize you sound exactly like the radical they're accusing you of being?" "I know." Lydia looked up at him, searching his face for disapproval. "Does it bother you?" Nathaniel pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "It makes me love you more. You're using your power and privilege to help people who've never had either. That's not radical. That's just being a decent human being." Society doesn't seem to agree. Society didn't agree when you faced down Victoria either. You won that battle. You'll win this one too. He kissed her forehead gently. Besides, I find your revolutionary tendencies quite attractive. Lydia laughed and pulled him closer, marveling at how natural this intimacy had become. The careful distance of their early marriage felt like a lifetime ago. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Davies entered with an apologetic expression. Sorry to disturb your graces, but there are visitors from London. They say it's quite urgent. The visitors turned out to be a delegation of 5 aristocratic women, led by Lady Worthington. They waited in the drawing room, looking decidedly out of place among Ravenscroft's comfortable furnishings. Your Grace, Lady Worthington curtsied respectfully when Lydia entered. Thank you for seeing us without notice. We've come with a proposition. Lydia gestured for them to sit, curiosity piqued. What kind of proposition? We want to learn from you. Lady Worthington glanced at her companions, who nodded encouragingly. What you've done here at Ravenscroft, the tenant reforms, the education initiatives, the support systems for working families, it's revolutionary. But it also works. Your estates are more profitable, and your people are healthier and happier than most aristocratic holdings in England. We want to implement similar programs on our own estates, another woman added, but we don't know where to start. We were hoping you might share your methods. Lydia stared at them in surprise. These were society women who had once whispered about her poverty and questioned her worthiness. Now they were asking for her expertise. You want my help? She said carefully. Even though society calls me a radical? Society always resists change. Lady Worthington's expression was earnest. But you've proven that change can be beneficial for everyone, landowners and tenants alike. Your reforms increase productivity while improving lives. That's not radical. That's simply intelligent management. Besides, another woman added with a wry smile, after Victoria's trial and conviction, society has largely concluded that you were right and we were wrong. You're no longer the disgraced merchant's daughter. You're the Duchess who stood against corruption and won. That carries significant influence. Victoria's trial had been swift and brutal. Faced with overwhelming evidence and Adrian's damning testimony, she had been convicted of arson and attempted murder. The sentence was 15 years in prison, reduced from life due to her family's influence. The Ashford name would never fully recover from the scandal. Lydia felt a complex mix of emotions about Victoria's fate. Relief that justice had been served, sadness that jealousy had destroyed a woman who might have been remarkable if she'd channeled her energy differently, and determination to ensure that other women didn't have to resort to cruelty to feel powerful. I'll help you, Lydia said finally. On one condition, the programs you implement must genuinely benefit your people, not just improve your profits. If I find out you're using my methods solely to extract more wealth while keeping your tenants in poverty, I'll publicly denounce you. The women exchanged glances, then nodded agreement. We understand, Lady Worthington said. We want to do this properly, the way you're doing it. Over the following months, Lydia became an unlikely advisor to a growing network of aristocratic women seeking to reform their estates. She traveled to various holdings, consulted on tenant agreements, helped establish schools and medical clinics, and taught practical management techniques she had learned through trial and error. The movement grew beyond anything she'd anticipated. More women joined, then some progressive men. Within a year, there was an informal coalition of reform-minded aristocrats working to improve conditions across England. They called themselves the Ravenscroft Society, and Lydia found herself at its center, not by seeking power, but by demonstrating that compassion and competence could coexist with nobility. The change wasn't universal. Many aristocrats still clung to old ways, insisting that the lower classes deserved their poverty and that reform was dangerous. But enough people were willing to try new approaches that the social landscape began shifting. One evening, nearly 18 months after that fateful night at Ashford House, Lydia stood in Ravenscroft's library reviewing correspondence from society members. Nathaniel found her there, surrounded by letters and reports, her face glowing with satisfaction. You look pleased with yourself, he observed. Look at this. Lydia held up a letter. The Hartley estate just completed their school construction. They're offering free education to all tenant children funded through estate profits. And here, the Morrison family restructured their tenant agreements to include medical care and retirement support for elderly workers. That's real change, Nathaniel. Substantial, meaningful change. All because you showed them it was possible. Nathaniel moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. You've started a revolution, my love. A quiet one, perhaps, but no less significant. We started it, Lydia corrected, leaning back against him. You supported every initiative, provided the resources and credibility I needed. This is our revolution. Speaking of our initiatives, Nathaniel's voice took on a different tone. I have some news that might interest you. Charlotte sent a letter. She's engaged. Lydia spun to face him. Engaged? To whom? Lord Pemberton's younger brother, apparently. A decent man, by all accounts, who shares Charlotte's progressive views. They met during the Ravenscroft Society's last gathering. Nathaniel smiled. She credits you with inspiring her to seek a marriage built on genuine partnership rather than social obligation. Tears pricked Lydia's eyes. Charlotte had stood by her through the darkest times, had risked her own reputation to tell the truth at Lady Pemberton's ball. She deserved happiness built on honesty and mutual respect. We should host their engagement party, Lydia said immediately. Something meaningful, not just another society spectacle. I had a feeling you'd say that. Nathaniel pulled her to her feet. But before we start planning Charlotte's future, I wanted to discuss our own. What about our future? Well, we've reformed the estates, started a social movement, and proved that love can grow from the most unlikely circumstances. His gray eyes held warmth and humor. I was thinking it might be time to start a family. Lydia's breath caught. They had discussed children in abstract terms, but hearing Nathaniel voice the desire made it suddenly, thrillingly real. A family, she repeated softly. Heirs for Ravenscroft. Not just heirs. Nathaniel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Children who'll grow up seeing that privilege comes with responsibility. That titles mean nothing without compassion. That real strength comes from helping others rather than exploiting them. Children who'll never know poverty or powerlessness, Lydia added, but who'll understand that others do, and that understanding creates obligation. Exactly. Nathaniel pulled her close. We'll raise revolutionaries in silk and diamonds, the most dangerous kind. Lydia laughed and kissed him, tasting joy and promise, and the future they would build together. The engagement party for Charlotte took place 3 months later at Ravenscroft Estate. Unlike the glittering, exclusive balls of London society, this was a celebration that welcomed everyone who had been part of their journey, aristocrats and tenant farmers, society ladies, and working-class families who had benefited from the reforms. Lady Worthington arrived with her delegation of reform-minded peers. Mary Porter came with her brother, both looking healthier and happier than when Lydia had first met them. Even Mrs. Hartwell, the London housekeeper, traveled north to attend, bringing several of the staff members who had testified against Victoria. Charlotte glowed with happiness, her fiancé clearly adoring her. During the toast, she raised her glass toward Lydia. To the Duchess of Ravenscroft, Charlotte announced, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. The woman who proved that falling can lead to flying, who showed us all that strength comes not from never breaking, but from how we rebuild, who transformed a marriage of convenience into a love story for the ages. Applause erupted, warm and genuine. Lydia felt tears threatening and blinked them back, overwhelmed by how far she had come. Later, as the party continued in the ballroom, Lydia slipped away to the terrace for air. The Yorkshire countryside stretched before her, beautiful and wild under the evening sky. This land was hers now, not because she'd been born to it, but because she'd earned it through courage and competence and love. Nathaniel found her there, as she'd known he would. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Do you ever think about that night? Lydia asked softly. At Ashford House, when Adrian destroyed me in front of everyone? Sometimes. Nathaniel's voice was thoughtful. Do you? Less and less. Lydia turned in his arms to face him. When I do remember, it feels like it happened to someone else. That terrified girl fleeing a ballroom in tears, she's not me anymore. No, she became you. The woman who faced down mobs and criminals and society's worst cruelty. The woman who built something beautiful from ruins. Nathaniel touched her face gently. That girl didn't disappear. She transformed. Because you gave me the chance to transform. Lydia's hand covered his. You saw something in me when I couldn't see anything in myself. You gave me partnership when I expected only charity. You gave me love when I thought I'd never have it. You earned every bit of it. Nathaniel's voice was fierce. I gave you an opportunity. You did the rest. You always had this strength, Lydia. You just needed the right circumstances to discover it. They stood together as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, and Lydia thought about the journey that had brought them here. From poverty and humiliation to power and purpose. From a marriage of cold necessity to a partnership built on trust and love. From being society's victim to becoming its conscience. Do you remember what Adrian said? She asked. That night he ended our engagement? Every word. Nathaniel's jaw tightened at the memory. He said only a fool would marry a pauper. Lydia smiled at the irony. He was right, in a way. It did take a fool. Someone foolish enough to see potential instead of poverty. Foolish enough to value character over bank accounts. Foolish enough to believe that a practical arrangement could become something extraordinary. Then I'm the happiest fool in England. Nathaniel echoed the words he'd spoken months ago, but now they carried deeper meaning. Marrying you was the smartest decision I ever made, and I'd make it again 1,000 times. Even knowing how much trouble I'd cause? Lydia teased. All the social reform and radical changes and revolutionary ideas? Especially because of those things. Nathaniel kissed her softly. You've made me better, Lydia. You've made Ravenscroft better. You're making England better. How could I regret any of that? Music drifted from the ballroom and they could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of people from different worlds coming together in celebration. This was what they had built. Not just a successful estate or a happy marriage, but a model for how society could work when compassion guided power. Your Grace? Mrs. Davies appeared at the terrace entrance, looking apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a family from the village asking to see you. They say it's not urgent, but they've brought gifts to thank you for helping their daughter secure an apprenticeship. Lydia exchanged glances with Nathaniel, and they shared a smile that held complete understanding. Their private moment could wait. People needed them, and serving those people was no longer obligation. It was purpose. We'll be right there, Lydia said warmly. As they walked back toward the ballroom together, Lydia caught her reflection in the terrace windows. She saw a woman in an elegant gown and Ravenscroft diamonds, standing tall beside her duke. But she also saw the girl who had fled a different ballroom in tears, the woman who had faced down fire and fury, the revolutionary who wore nobility like armor in service of justice. All of those women lived in her now, each one a layer of the person she had become. Inside, the celebration continued. Charlotte was dancing with her fiancé, their faces glowing with new love. Lady Worthington was deep in conversation with Mary Porter's mother, discussing employment opportunities for village women. Tenant farmers chatted easily with aristocrats, the old social barriers dissolving in the warmth of shared purpose. This was the world Lydia had fought for. Not perfect, not free of struggle, but fundamentally different from the cruel hierarchy that had once destroyed her. A world where compassion mattered as much as lineage, where ability counted more than birth, where love could grow from the most unlikely soil. The family from the village presented their gifts, handmade items created with obvious care and pride. Lydia accepted them with genuine gratitude, listening to their story about how the apprenticeship she'd arranged had changed their daughter's life. You gave her hope, the mother said, tears in her eyes. When everyone else said girls like her couldn't aspire to skilled trades, you found her a placement and vouched for her character. She's thriving now, making her own way in the world. That's what we're here for, Lydia said simply. To help people make their own way. Hours later, when the last guests had departed and the estate had settled into peaceful silence, Lydia and Nathaniel stood in their shared chambers, no longer separated by the careful distance of a business arrangement, but united in every sense. Tired? Nathaniel asked, helping her remove the heavy diamond necklace. Exhausted, Lydia admitted, but happy, profoundly, completely happy. She thought about where she had been 18 months ago, broken, desperate, convinced her life was over. She thought about the cold proposal in a shabby rented room, the terrifying journey to Yorkshire, the slow transformation from frightened survivor to confident leader. She thought about the moment she'd realized that partnership could become love, that respect could deepen into devotion, that a marriage born from necessity could transform into the greatest blessing of her life. "What are you thinking?" Nathaniel asked, watching her face in the mirror. "That I wouldn't change anything," Lydia said softly. "Not the poverty, not the humiliation, not even Adrian's cruelty. All of it brought me here, to you, to this life we've built. Every terrible moment was worth it for this." "Even the night at Ashford House?" "Especially that night." Lydia turned to face him. "That was the night I stopped being a victim and started becoming myself. The night I walked away from everything I thought I wanted and toward everything I actually needed." Nathaniel pulled her close, and they stood together in the quiet intimacy of their chambers, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of broken plans and discovered that the best love stories are the ones you never see coming. Outside, Yorkshire stretched into darkness, dotted with lights from tenant cottages and village homes, homes that were safer, healthier, and more hopeful because of the work Lydia and Nathaniel had done together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More people seeking help, more reforms to implement, more resistance from those who preferred the old ways. The revolution they had started would continue demanding their energy and commitment, but tonight was for gratitude and joy, for celebrating how far they had come and dreaming about where they would go next. Lydia thought about Adrian one final time, allowing herself a moment of bitter satisfaction. He had been right about one thing: only a fool would marry a pauper. But he'd been catastrophically wrong about which of them was the fool. The pauper he'd scorned had become a duchess who changed the world. The convenient marriage he'd mocked had become a love story that inspired others. The powerless girl he'd destroyed had risen from the ashes stronger than he would ever be. And the fool who had married her? He had gained a partner who made him better, a love that deepened every day, and a purpose that gave meaning to privilege. Nathaniel smiled at her, that private smile that belonged only to her, and Lydia smiled back. They didn't need words anymore. Everything that mattered was spoken in the language they had created together: partnership and respect and love that had been forged in fire and tempered by adversity. "Ready for bed, Your Grace?" Nathaniel asked. "Ready for everything," Lydia replied. And she was. Ready for tomorrow's challenges, ready for the family they would build, ready for the decades of partnership and love stretching before them. The girl who had once fled a ballroom in tears had become the woman who changed England. The duke who had proposed a cold business arrangement had become the husband who loved with his whole heart. And the marriage that society had mocked as a mercenary arrangement had become the foundation for a legacy that would outlast them both. In the end, only a fool would have married a pauper, and thank heaven for fools.